Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
That's a funny cigar.
It's not bad, right?
That's really nice.
Foundation Cigars, shout out to them. What's up, Mike Baker? How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
What do you got in those pieces of paper to scare the shit out of me with?
Yeah, you know what? This.
I got notes.
I got notes because you know why? Because I'm always being accused of wandering, not being as organized as I should be.
That's
right?
just this podcast does that to people.
Yeah, maybe so. But I said to myself, fuck it, I'm gonna write some things down.
Okay.
Because there's so much has happened since the last time we sat down.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, I made a list. I'm gonna run through that if you don't mind.
Okay.
Since last show, see, I even headlined it. Chinese spy balloon, failed mutiny in Russia, 4 indictments of Trump. Now, last night was the 4th. Bank account records showing the Biden family took over $20 million. Pee Wee Herman died.
Glad you got that in your notes.
I got that. I actually, yeah, I've got it. It's right there, and it's right before the 2-year anniversary of the Afghan withdrawal. I probably should have put that.
Why did you put Pee Wee Herman in there?
You know what? Because when I found out that Paul Rubens died, I was sad. I mean, it was like I'm old enough. I actually went to a show that Paul did when he was kind of working out his Pee Wee character, right? And
oh, really?
And it was fantastic. It was
when
a great
was this?
show. This was, oh fuck, it was years ago. So it would have been before it was probably like 82, 83, 81, somewhere in that time frame, right? It was a long time ago. It was at Georgetown University in D.C. And it was a great show. Anyway, point being. And I always thought like he didn't get enough credit for like Pee Wee's Playhouse, and I know that people are like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" But he was a good guy. He got off the rails with a little bit for a period of time with that. He was wanking in a porn theater.
Yeah, but isn't that what they do in those things? Especially a gay porn theater?
I guess, yeah. It's got to sound weird, right? The kids though.
Yeah.
Like, porn theater. What?
I know.
Yeah.
They used to have to go to places.
You had to. I don't know
if you had to. Back when he was doing it, I don't think there was a law. Yeah. But I think back when he was doing it, there were still VHS tapes were out. And I think DVDs were out back then too. Because this was like, I want to say he got busted in like 90 something.
Yeah. It was easily 91. Okay, yeah.
So definitely VHS tapes were. That was back when you had to go through the curtains
or laser discs or
remember,
something.
Like there's beads.
Yeah.
These kids today, they don't know jack shit. They're getting their porn off of a phone.
Well, that's just it. I don't think they don't have an appreciation for how hard you had to work back in certainly the 70s and 80s. I mean, it got easier by the time the 1990s rolled around, but it was you had to go on like a quest or something.
Yeah, you had to be shamed.
Yeah. What is it? What is it that you seek?
Simple facts what happened Friday night in Ruben's hometown of Sarasota, Florida are familiar by now. According to the county sheriff's office, 3 detectives. They sent in 3 guys to catch people jerking off at the XXX South Trail Cinema to watch the audience that was watching a triple bill of Catalina 5-0 Tiger Shark, Nurse Nancy, and Turn Up the Heat. After the sting operation had hauled in 3 men on charges of violating Florida State Statute 800.03, exposure of sexual organs. Detective William Walters allegedly saw a man masturbate, in quotes. That's how the rap sheet spells it. Spells it wrong. Instead of it says E. In the darkened theater at 8:25 p.m. and again at 8:35. Twice. He caught him twice.
Yeah. The first sighting wasn't enough. You had to go back to get it.
Meanwhile, the guy's got amazing recovery powers.
Yeah.
8:25, he blasts off, and then he's back at it at 8:35. That's a fucking stud right there.
Yeah, and that was before Viagra.
Placed under, I don't know if that's true. When did Viagra come around? Placed under arrest upon leaving the theater, the alleged offender quietly told the detectives his famous pseudonym and, according to the police, made a novel Pee Wee-esque attempt at a buy-off. He offered to perform at a children's benefit for the sheriff's office if the charges were dropped. A department spokesperson said that the deputies did not feel at the time they had enough probable cause to charge Rubens with attempted bribery. Well, is that bribery really when you're saying you're going to perform at an event? Isn't it money only bribery?
It's you're bartering. You're
anything?
Bartering. Yeah.
Like if someone says, "I'll suck your cock."
Yeah.
That's bribery. A local reporter recognized Rubin's name on the arrest sheet the next day. Within hours, the scandal machinery was roaring at full throttle.
Boy. Yeah. Yeah. But then he did. Okay, so everybody makes mistakes. But then he recovered. And, he went on to
It's a fairly harmless crime. First
Yeah.
of all, if you're in a porn theater, I think you should assume that those dudes with raincoats on are beaten off.
Yeah.
You're wearing rubber gloves in there, and like those things are disgusting.
And to
If
be
people
fair-
don't recognize, like I never went into one of those, so I'm just on anecdotes. But I would imagine like porn theaters are fucking gross.
You'd have to think so, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
a regular theater's bad enough. Your feet stick to the floor,
Yeah.
and that's just from the Pepsi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
No,
porn theater.
I got to tell you, and honestly, the Nurse Nancy was an underrated film, I think. So there was that. So that's Paul Rubens. That's Pee Wee Herman. He died. I just made a note because I thought
My friend Phil
yeah.
Hartman worked with him. That's how he kind of got his start in show business on Pee Wee's
That's
Playhouse.
interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was on Pee Wee's Playhouse. He was one of the writers for Pee Wee's Playhouse.
I'll be damned.
Yeah, he always spoke very highly of Pee Wee.
Yeah. Oh.
I fucking loved that show when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. And Pee Wee's Big Adventure is a fucking
Yes.
amazing movie.
Exactly. And that was when did that come out? That was
That was like
I want to say 80.
close to 89. It must
Yeah.
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 Well, I was dating this girl. I remember specifically the girl that I was dating at the time that I was dating like right around I was graduating high school because we were crying laughing. It was so funny. Like back then, it was so unique. Don't forget to tell him Large Marge sent you. Fun fucking movie.
Yeah, I remember I took a date to Pee Wee's show, his comedy show, and I mean the place was rolling, right? It was he really was. It was an interesting cat, but anyway.
I like that I'm seeing that side of you, Mike Baker.
Yeah,
The Pee Wee Herman fan.
Pee Wee Herman. I still have a pair of his. This is gonna sound weird. Signed big underpants. I kept them all these years because they're so fucking funny. And yeah, I'll give them to one of my boys. I'm not sure which one. Yeah,
Maybe put it in a museum somewhere. Probably worth a lot of money one day.
yeah. I don't even know where we go from Pee Wee Herman.
We go from that to whatever notes you got.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Anything else crazy?
Yeah. Well, we're gonna unfreeze a lot of money. For the Iran prisoner swap. That's another story. But we could start with the Chinese spy balloon, since I don't know why I started there first.
So, what is your take on the Chinese spy balloon? They
well-
said that that there was a bunch of those that were happening while Trump was in office, but they didn't tell him about it because they were worried he was going to shoot him down, which I thought was fucking amazing.
That might, you know what? I'm not gonna at this stage of the game. I'm not gonna say anything doesn't sound plausible. Everything sounds plausible nowadays.
Yeah.
So the Chinese regime continues, just like with the fucking Wuhan lab. The Chinese regime continues to just say it was a weather balloon, right? It got blown off course. It was a weather balloon. Well, it didn't get blown off course. It had a massive array of propellers. It had a rudder. It had solar panels to keep those propellers churning. They knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. And, it shows up over, Alaska on the end of January, whatever, and proceeds to travel across the country in a path that is clearly designed to collect intelligence from sensitive facilities, right? It flies over Montana.
What's in Montana?
A lot, but there's Malmstrom Air Force Base, and it's part of our where we put our land-based nukes.
What
right?
part of Montana is that in?
Yeah, the northern part. If you
Close to
square it up.
Canada?
Yeah, not well, a little further south than Canada, but it's like the top quarter, I guess. I think that's right. And it is 150 or so, silo-based nukes there. There it is.
So that's the base.
Yeah,
And so it was flying over that.
flying over Malmstrom.
And so they were aware of it? The Air Force Base was aware of it?
They by the time, yeah, and look, it's not as if we're not, taking measures or countermeasures to prevent surveillance, because the Chinese have spy satellites, very technical, very very advanced. So we know how to protect communications. We know how to protect, and we also know what's available, right? So satellite imagery is going to give you a fair amount of information anyway. So the question is, okay, well, why the hell was this thing, which was as tall as the Statue of Liberty, why was it floating around up there with an array of antennas, obviously there to collect? But it went over there. It went over Omaha, or near Omaha, where we've got U.S. Strategic Command and Offutt Air Force Base. And you know, the U.S. government, the military, was like, well, we don't believe, after the fact, after we shot it down, they're like, we don't believe that it was collecting, you know, and we took measures to prevent it from collecting. And not only that, we didn't shoot it down at the beginning because we were monitoring its capabilities and learning from that. Now, part of that is true, right? If you've got a target, you identify a target, unlike with law enforcement in the intelligence world, you let that run, right? Because you want to learn everything you can about that target. You know, who's there to support it? What is, you know, what's that
How
look
do they
like?
learn? How do they know that? Can they figure out what it's transmitting? Can they tune into it?
Most of it's signals intelligence and capabilities. It's not really imagery that you're getting from it, although that's part of it. But you know, so I have no doubt that, you know, because everyone was saying, well, why wouldn't you just shoot the fucker down when it showed up over Alaska on the 28th of January, or when we became aware of it initially. And, you know, because we live in this highly partisan world, everybody was saying, well, because Biden's inept and, you know, they didn't know what they were doing and they let it float all the way across the states. So you can't discount the argument that says, well, part of it is we let it go because we were gathering intelligence ourselves from their capabilities. It's always interesting to know. It's just like when we, here I go disappearing down a rabbit hole, when we lost that platform, that air asset, during the Abbottabad raid, right? And we had to leave it behind. And they destroyed, you know, to the degree they could, everything that was in it of interest. But the platform itself was of interest, right? It was because the two things that are important nowadays are stealth and speed. And, you know, there was a stealth design involved there. And there's also material science that's interesting. So left it behind after they bagged bin Laden, literally. And then 3 days later, the Pakistanis had invited the Chinese to come in. And they were swarming all over that helicopter, right, gathering intelligence. So you always, if you have the opportunity to observe a target, I guess, like I said, you know, then you do. And you can gain intelligence from. So I'm not one of those people who said, I should have shot it down immediately, because I don't know what they were getting from it. But I do know that the purpose of the balloon was to gather intelligence on us, on our sensitive facilities to some degree. So anyway, and then they sent all the remains after they recovered them off the coast of South Carolina to wherever, Quantico. And that was kind of the last we ever heard of it, right? Because we've all got attention deficit disorder. Nobody wants to, you know, think, okay, what did we learn? Can we do a hot wash on it and figure out, and to what degree can you tell the public what the hell was going on, right? Because honestly, I don't know that we ever would have learned about it if it hadn't been so large and, you know, members of the public hadn't seen it or spotted
Right.
it. So
What altitude was it hovering around at?
it went, it cut a path through a couple of other bases, Minot, and I forget where else it was to the south of there. But the fact that it hovered over a period of time over Malmstrom, right, is really all you need to know, right? Because if it's a weather balloon, you know, it doesn't. I guess one point being, you know, we never really pushed the Chinese regime under Xi for anything, right? We haven't forced the hand on the pandemic, and we're going to have another pandemic. So it would be nice to know what the fuck actually happened, right? Not to disappear down
Why
that
do you
one.
think we're going to have another pandemic? Everybody keeps saying that.
Yeah, well, because
It's very disconcerting. We haven't had
Yeah.
one in 100 years, not a legitimate one.
well, not to toot my own horn, which I guess, you know, that would be an interesting thing if you could do that. But it was a few years back when we were talking, and I said, you know, we'll have the next big thing will be a pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someone had pointed that out to me. I'd forgotten about it, but they sent it to me. And so my point back then and the point now is that it's bound to happen, right? We're an increasingly shrinking globe. There's more people. We're in contact. We're, you know, with everything that goes on, right? Whether it's in a natural based or just what we're doing in biotech and pharma, it's bound to happen. And so I guess you'd think that if we were serious-minded, we would demand answers, and we wouldn't just allow the Xi regime to just shrug it off constantly, right? I mean, you know that there would be a massive debrief on this whole situation if it happened in the U.S. or the U.K. or, you know, started in Australia or wherever, right? The rest of the world wouldn't let it go. But there's something about it. We never push the Chinese regime to the degree that we need to get an answer. And so the point being, it's the same with the damn balloon.
Is it because we don't think we'll ever get an answer and it's kind of a waste of time? Because it's not like they're transparent.
Yeah. I
they
think
would
that's
just
it.
not tell us the truth.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's like doing business in China. If you're investing in a pseudo state-owned enterprise or whatever, you always know there's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 sets of books, right? It's always they're just very good at obfuscating, and they also think they don't need to answer. We don't care. They don't care. And Xi believes that they are still on, despite some problems in their economy, they're still on the slow march to the top of the food chain. So he certainly doesn't care. Anyway,
do you think anything would be different if someone else was in office?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say if we got, if Trump or, a Republican was in office that we'd get a different result. I don't think so. We've had sort of a unsatisfactory relationship related to China for decades. Right? We haven't, no administration has really pushed back appropriately against their theft of economic intelligence or research and development or whatever. So all those things keep happening, and we never make the effort, right? I mean, look at some of the things they're doing now. I've gotten bizarrely focused on the issue of we've talked about this before, of critical minerals, right? Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that I find really interesting is this push towards net zero, carbon production and getting rid of fossil fuels, stopping fossil fuels. Well, you can't stop fossil fuels and regulate mining out of existence at the same time. You've got to do one or the other to fuel production, to fuel manufacturing, to heat people's homes, to produce whatever you're going to produce. And so if we want to get rid of fossil fuels, by definition, you have to increase mining of critical minerals. There's no way around it. If you do both, which the Biden administration is basically trying to do, I think they're placating their base by, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, and they're also making decisions that are over-regulating the permitting process for mining. And we have a lot of critical minerals available in this country, right? We got lithium, phosphate, which should be on the critical minerals list. We got all these things that we need if we're going to continue to march away from fossil fuels. But the current administration just keeps under this theory of keep it in the ground, right? And that's a big push by environmentalists, right? Keep it all in the ground, right? Lock it up.
But how do the only way to do that is to keep allowing what's essentially slave labor to extract cobalt and things from the Congo.
Right, and you've talked about this, and it absolutely.
Siddharth Kara's book is insane.
Yeah.
And the videos that he got when he was, he risked his life to get footage of this stuff in the Congo. It's horrendous, and anybody thinks that in any way that's a good solution to our problems is fucking insane.
Well, but that's where this is going. If the U.S. continues, and this is where I'll bring China in, and by the way, China, they own or operate, I think it's like 15 of the 19 cobalt mines in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So it doesn't matter whether they're leading the way, and China controls 30 of the 50 critical minerals anyway. They produce more than anybody else. They certainly control the refining process for most of the critical minerals. But it doesn't matter whether they're mining it in their own country. They've also been busy locking up opportunities elsewhere, right, to control these things. And so, there's very little pushback. But if you look at one case, because we've talked about cobalt, we've talked about lithium, which is here we could be mining, but the government's shutting down opportunities to do that, either by declaring things off limits in terms of the land area or just making the permitting process so damn difficult. But phosphate, I mentioned that as an example. I got disappeared down some rabbit hole looking at all of this. It's not on the critical minerals list, right? And there's 50 critical minerals. Now, phosphate, along with two other things, nitrogen and potassium, are the key nutrients that you use for fertilizers, right, to feed the world, not just the U.S., right? You can't do mass farming, right? And everybody wants to grow local, but the reality is it's a lot of people, right? And if you want, the least privileged people around the globe to eat, you got to do large-scale farming. You can't do that without phosphate, right? And so China is the #1 producer of phosphate in the world, and I think Russia is 4th. And they produce like 5 times more combined, 5 times more than we do in the U.S. And yet there is significant pushback here in the U.S., in part because it fits a Chinese narrative. And the Chinese have decided, the regime has, again, not the people, the Chinese regime has decided that one of the best ways to get what they want in terms of U.S. behavior is not to try to influence, the White House, but it's to reach out to local and state officials. So here's where I'm going with this. When you look at decisions made at state level or local level, the Chinese regime and the ODNI, the Director of National Intelligence, released a report, and they talked about this. They said that the Chinese are doubling down on their efforts to exert influence through a variety of means, environmental groups, encouraging litigation, right, against mining operations or whatever it may be, social influencers, to try to get a message out, right, that influences local and state regulators to do things such as saying, no, got to keep it in the ground. No, we don't want phosphate mining, as an example. And that serves the purpose. Whether an environmental group or whether a group that's out there that focuses on these things and files lawsuits constantly for environmental purposes. And then, by the way, those lawyers, usually recoup their funds from, what is called the Endangered Species Act that allows them to get their money back. So you think, oh, wow, these lawyers are fighting and it's pro bono. No, it's not. They're getting paid. So, but they're doing it, whether they do it knowingly or whether they do it unwittingly, it still serves the purpose of the Chinese regime, which is looking to say, keep it in the ground because we want to control all of this. And again, whether it's cobalt, whether it's lithium, whether it's phosphate, whatever it may be, it's a fascinating thing. But the point being that we can't pursue a green future and at the same time overregulate the mining process. And it just doesn't work.
China has so much influence on America. It's crazy how different the playing field is between like what we're allowed to do. Like Americans can't own businesses in China. They can't own land in China. They can't buy property. But China can do all those things here. And they can influence our universities. They bring their students over here. Their students siphon up data and information and oftentimes get caught. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, they get caught, right?
Yeah.
There's been quite a few of those cases.
There have been, but you think about that's the tip of the iceberg, right? That's a small number that, because it's an incredibly heavy lift, right? A counterintelligence operation is really tough, and so I look at that and I think, thank God we caught that person. But then you think, well, how many more are there out there?
Right.
So,
that's the thing. It's like how many of them are just more careful?
Yeah. It is interesting in a way. We used to talk about during when we were on the war on terror, right? And everybody's forgotten about that, for the most part. Although we probably should talk a little bit about.
It's on the back burner.
Yeah, it's bubbling away in Afghanistan, which we should also talk about. But we used to talk about war on terror and how the terrorists were using our open society against us, right?
Right.
And the Chinese regime does the same thing, right? They understand and they look at how we operate and they say, okay, where's the weaknesses, right? Where are the leverage points that we can use to turn that against them? And this idea. Look, China produces more carbon than all the developed nations combined,
which is very important to talk about when people are talking about going green. Because the amount of impact that would happen, even if the United States went to zero, went to zero carbon output, you're not going to put a dent in what's happening to the world because most of it is coming from China and India.
India, right?
Yeah,
right.
That's most of it. So all this shit about don't eat meat because we're going to save the world, you're not saving jack shit.
No.
And I don't understand where that message is coming from or why there's not a nuanced perspective where people are taking into account all these other variables.
Well, in part, again,
Doesn't fit the narrative.
it doesn't fit the narrative, but also there is this effort. Look, I mean, we talked. You know, you remember the what was that called? Internet Research Agency, right?
Yeah.
It was, and so the potential for influence on the elections, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, which wasn't that long ago, and the Chinese regime actually does it better than the Russians, right? They've got way more resources. They've got a much longer view. Frankly, they're more sophisticated, right? And so sometimes you look at things and you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why are we, acting in this way? And then you think, well, because you've got like a local or a grassroots community activist group, right? And they're not Chinese spies. They're not working, but the Chinese regime identifies them and says, you know what, if we can influence them, this is just pure, propaganda or covert action campaign. If I can influence that activist group to go out and tell those whomever, the city officials or the county commissioners or whatever, that this is bad, right? And this is, we need to stop this, right? We shouldn't be mining for lithium in Nevada or wherever. We shouldn't be pursuing, logical steps to get control over the critical mineral supply chain issue, right? Why wouldn't you do that, right? It's smart activity on the part of the Chinese regime and the intel service there. So that part of it to me makes sense. The problem we have is that there's a lack of awareness, right? Now there was again, it shows you I've been spending too much time reading on this shit, but I'm fascinated by this idea that we're trying to do two things that are completely opposed to each other. Stop fossil fuels and also keep critical minerals in the ground that we're going to need to pursue green energy. That part is amazing, but I did actually write down. Well,
but that is part of the problem with green energy is that it's not really green because you do have to mine. And when you do mine, there is consequences. There's
consequences, and that's... But as you pointed out, look, we mine cleaner and safer than anybody else, and that's why there was I'm gonna actually read a quote. This shows you. Look, see, I feel like I'm maturing. I've gotten more organized.
You're so prepared, Mike. I'm so proud of you.
I know. Look, see, I know. There have been times when you've been staring at me, thinking, "Where the fuck is he talking about? Or is he going? Is he taking a nap?" So they had a hearing in Arizona not too long ago about critical minerals, the issue of critical minerals, and the importance of them, and the importance of speeding up the permitting process. If we want to pursue a green future, you got to do it. And this guy, Congressman, I know I've got a note here, Paul Gosar, from wherever, Arizona, said, and this is a quote, "The anti-mining actions by the Biden administration hurt America's economy, threaten our national security, and push mineral production abroad, where environmental and labor standards pale in comparison with our own," right? And that's absolutely correct. And again, all you have to do is look at what goes on in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's insane, but I don't see that we're going to walk that back, right? Because there's too much pushback, and no matter what mineral you're talking about, I don't see that necessarily changing unless you get maybe a change in administration, and then you get the effort to deregulate, and then you speed up permitting. But at some point, we're going to be screwed. China recently put the brakes on exporting a couple of minerals that are critical to producing mineral systems and solar panels, and they've done that in the past, right? And that should be a clear signal to us that we got to change our thought process on all of this. But I'm not confident that will happen. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm not confident either because it seems like that narrative is just in the American public. The mining is bad, we need to go green, but they don't see the inconsistencies of taking those two positions at the same time. Well,
the Republicans have never done a particularly good job of messaging, right? And they need to get better at it. So and I think they will. There's a few bills passed around apparently that may help the situation, but for now, I guess, you know, with China's kind of significant control over the minerals as it stands, we don't have any option other than to deal with them, right? And so no wonder we sometimes don't push back. And I guess that's where I was coming back around. You said, well, why don't we push back, or how we, you know, this we don't have that much leverage right now. So I think that's part of the answer.
Well, there's also, we need a push for nuclear. We're legitimate new nuclear power plants in this country, which is, it's so hard for people to wrap their heads around it because of 3 Mile Island and Fukushima, but that is the safest, cleanest electricity that we can generate in this country.
Well, you would think that would be a logical. It's not a big leap, right? But you're right. People are so emotive, right?
Yeah.
And they still, you can say 3 Mile Island, and everybody knows, right?
Right.
I mean, and most people can't retain a lot of information about historical facts.
Chernobyl, Fukushima.
Yeah. And so, and we've gotten better at safety systems and redundancies, right? So, absolutely. But you know, people talk about, well, we got to expand nuclear energy, and
well, you look at the deaths from nuclear; they're so small, just in comparison to the chronic illness that comes from coal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we watched this documentary on this one town. Is it Indiana, Jamie? That one town? Yeah. Where there's multiple coal plants near the area, and these people have like a fine dusting of particulate in their cars every day. So they're breathing this air that has this coal particulate. And there's a host of chronic illnesses that are coming with this. So many people have respiratory conditions.
And we've been busy trying to shut down, you know, use of coal, and fine, but you got to replace it with something that's pragmatic, right? And right now, solar and wind isn't going to cut it, right? And we're going to.
Seems people exaggerate about the efficiency and efficacy of solar and wind. They really do love to sort of exaggerate how effective it is, and also how much energy it takes to generate a windmill, just to build one and maintain it.
Right, and also what going green is going to mean to the grid system, right? And the demand for electricity. And,
all the cars.
And yes.
That was the thing in California. They said by 2035, we're not going to sell any internal combustion engines. Also, don't charge your car because it's hot out. Like, what the fuck?
Everybody, stay home.
California.
Stay home. Yeah. Oh, God.
It is the test case for stupidity.
Yeah. Well, you know, who knows? Maybe the current governor is going to, you know, throw his hat in the ring.
I think he is.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, I'm an armchair conspiracy theorist. But if I had to guess, I would say that all this stuff that's coming out slowly but surely about Biden is on purpose, and they want to get rid of him. I think he wants to run again, and I don't think the Democrats think that he could win. I think they're right, and I think they're gonna slowly but surely expose more of these like very clear pieces of evidence of corruption.
Yeah.
The $20 million is fucking bananas. The fact that this isn't all over the New York Times and the Washington Post and mainstream news, that they're not blaring it from the rooftops, because you know they would be if it was Trump.
Oh, absolutely. Or really any, it wouldn't matter, Trump or whomever would be on the GOP side. Yeah. No, look, I've got a intelligence and investigations firm. You may have heard of them.
I did.
Yeah, Portman Square Group, for all your information and security needs. And
you've changed the name a couple times, huh?
Just avoiding bill collectors. So, yeah, and but I've got investigators, great people. That's the most rewarding thing about building a business is just the wonderful people that you eventually get to work with, and they raise families and they stick with you. And so I've got some investigators that I guess the point is they could have wrapped this puppy up some time ago, right? It's an asset tracing exercise is what they're engaged in. And, you know, maybe they'll stay focused, maybe they'll keep going, right? But when you've got an asset tracing exercise, you've got a myriad of single-purpose companies set up, you know, around there. First of all, when you look at a case and you say, we've got 20-plus single-purpose companies set up here for pass-through of funds, that's what we would call a clue about money laundering, right? That's why you do that, right? To hide beneficial ownership, to hide the flow of funds and transactions that are involved, to obfuscate and make it difficult for the obvious, because their feeling is most people will maybe dig once or twice, but then they'll get bored and they'll move on, right? Let's make this as complicated as possible. And so you start to see, there's always fraud indicators. You start to see certain things in an investigation. And the great thing about asset tracing also is that there are records, right? And that's what they're finding out now. So and I'm glad, because whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, it wouldn't matter. If you've got an asshole who's in office and is engaged in pay for play, right? And there's no way, frankly, that this president didn't know that he was being used as the dog in the dog and pony show, right? And so they've got these records available to them. And with the power of the government, their ability to subpoena and do all these things that they can do, they will have the case figured out at some point. The problem with Washington is, do they have do they have the grit to stick with it, right? And then the next question is, does anything happen as a result? But it is, in my mind, anyway, for what that's worth, there's no doubt this is money laundering. And it's pathetic, as you pointed out, that there's so little interest, right? From a completely incurious, well, not incurious, but just a completely partisan, significant majority of the media. They don't, it's not that they don't care, it's that they do care, and they're taking every effort, and they're now having to contort themselves into certain ways because it's getting more and more difficult to provide top cover for the Biden administration. But they've been trying, and they're just, at some point maybe the dam breaks, and there's so much paper evidence that they can't ignore it anymore. But you would have thought that some enterprising young journalists who understand the importance of objectivity, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, would have gotten off their ass and really pursued this story, because it's a Pulitzer Prize winning story at the end of the day. But
the question is, what kind of pushback do they get in pursuing that story? How dangerous is it for them to pursue that story? Because it seems like it would be fairly dangerous. I mean, you're talking about extraordinary amounts of money, and this is just what's been uncovered, right?
Right.
So we've only gone back to what, like 2013 or 14 or something like that?
Yeah, back to the VP days.
Right.
Yeah.
So what about before that? Like when did this start?
Yeah.
Did this only start when he was VP? Did he get his son involved to give him some sort of a meaningful business?
It seems like he was the bag man, right?
Yeah.
And that's another part of this story that's fascinating. It's not like he was producing anything. It's not like Hunter Biden was producing something.
He's producing some good videos.
Yeah,
made some great photos.
Fine, yeah.
He seems like the kind of guy that you would expect to be involved in that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a wild boy.
And he's also the sort of guy that you would identify immediately. If you were on the Chinese side of things, as an example, whatever, $8 million, whatever, he's the target.
That's
right?
the guy.
Look at that. That's your weak link next to, with the greatest access possible to the second most powerful person, theoretically, in the country. That's a fantastic target, right?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of weaknesses there that you can play off of.
And
right?
for them, $20 million over a few years, that's a fucking minor drop in the bucket.
It's literally nothing, and it's a great payday for them. And whether it's Burisma and look, there is no reason he was being placed on boards other than access to his father. Even if somebody who's highly partisan on the Democratic side has got to at least be honest enough to admit that. So then the question becomes, all right, was at the time vice president, and then after that, was he aware? Did he know that Hunter was out there doing all these things and using access? And at first it was like, I had no idea, wasn't talking. And then suddenly it's like, well, I was on some phone calls, but it wasn't important. And now the media's got to spin that narrative. Well, he wasn't talking about anything of substance.
Well, there's a new photo that just got released of him on a plane to Ukraine in 2015.
Yeah.
So I think this is, to my point, that I think they're slowly releasing this stuff because they plan on getting rid of him.
Yeah. Well, if they do, then what happens to Kamala Harris?
She's gone.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no way. You can't keep her. She's got the lowest approval rating of any vice president ever, including Dan Quayle.
Oh God, there's a good
Which people
cultural
forgot
pull.
about that guy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He
no.
was what they used to. The comics used to joke that guy was assassination insurance. 'Cause nobody wants to kill the president and
shit.
then have that fucking guy take over.
I forgot about that, but no, but you're right, and I think if they can't. Yeah, they can't move Kamala Harris out as long as Biden's the candidate, right? Because that
Right.
they wouldn't weather that optic. But if he has to step aside, then obviously it's a brand new ticket. It's a brand new day, and they'll come up with something. So, I guess the question is, do they firmly believe that Biden can't win again if it's Trump or whomever?
The only way Biden's going to win again is never Trump. These never Trump people.
Yeah.
There are people that will vote for a fucking box of hammers before they would vote for Trump. And that's a real segment of our population. I don't know what percentage is, but it's probably fairly high. They have enough trust in the Democratic establishment that they think that the Democrats would figure out a way to run the country better, even with a puppet, than they would with Donald Trump in office.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also the independents. Don't forget, the independents are sort of the moderates that previously had voted for Trump and then got tired of the chaos, and then in the last election said, no, I'm not going to do that again. I don't think they walk it back and say, yeah, actually give me, because I don't. People are, again, very emotive. So
there's also the indictments. Now, what is your take on this Georgia thing? Because the Georgia thing is interesting, because I was just watching this video today that was detailing what they were claiming was evidence of fraud in the Georgia election.
Yeah.
And there's apparently some videos of people moving boxes around and doing some things that seem a little, at least on the surface, suspicious without an adequate explanation.
Yeah. I think it's I think they don't care whether they win or not, and I think they brought a fairly massive racketeering or RICO, charge at the top of this, sort of a criminal
10 counts,
conspiracy.
right?
Yeah, but it involves like Trump plus 18 others. And I think they can't be stupid. So they probably understand that it falls apart in appeal, right? And I don't think that's going to hold up. But I don't think they care, because last night, again, it shows you how bizarre this is. They held a press conference, right? They rushed this thing through. First of all, here's an interesting fact. First of all, the indictment showed up on the county website, right, in the afternoon, before the grand jury had voted, right? Before they had come across with what the charges would be, right? And so all of a sudden that comes across on the public domain, and I think it was Reuters that snapped it and kind of ran with it as a story. But then it was taken down off the county's website, right? And they were asked about it later on, and they said, it was fictitious or some bullshit, right? So you wonder, okay, how did that get leaked? Because then those charges that showed up earlier in the day matched what ended up being voted on by the grand jury. So that's a little odd, and it's, as far as I can remember, I think it's illegal to leak that sort of information, right, ahead of time. But also, how would they know? How would they know how the grand jury was going to decide at the end of the day what indictments to throw out there or to put out there in this charge? So that's something that probably should be looked at, but in today's world may not. But I think really she was pushing last night at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. Who holds a press conference at this point, at that time of night? But she was saying she wants it out there and to start this trial in 6 months. And so, 6 months from now is February. So right in the middle of all the caucuses and all the campaigning that goes on. And whether it's that one or whether it's the one from D.C. or it doesn't matter. They're creating a very lasting narrative that's going to go through the election season, and I think that's really what they want. And whether any of this actually holds, I don't think they give a rat's ass. Some people do.
If this was happening in the other direction.
Oh.
And by the way, if Trump was in office and Biden was running against him, and this evidence was available, this evidence of all the corruption with his son, that's far clearer. This is like real clear stuff.
Well, but they always come back with, look, it was the Trump kids were working and doing business, and you think, they had a business, right? They were real estate developers. There's tangible activity there. Now, that's part of the problem. That's how it gets muddied. Is that people, in the media or people who are supportive of an administration will say, yeah, but everybody does it. Right? Everybody's engaged in pay for play. Everybody's engaged in influence peddling, and there's some truth in that. But not everybody's engaged in money laundering.
Right.
That might be worth some investigation. But again, I don't think that the point of this exercise on the part of the various DAs and that's another thing. Look, the DA down in Georgia is that's an elected position, and she's running for office again, and she's campaigning based on getting Trump, right? And she's raising money off of this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get Trump, right? That seems a little odd too, right? I mean, I don't know. It's no surprise that people are losing confidence in the government.
Have you looked at any of the evidence of election manipulation?
Some, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't disappeared fully down that rabbit hole yet. I'm.
Seems like it'd really suck you in.
Yeah, I think it would. And there's a lot of communities. At the times that I have looked, there's a lot of shit out there, and trying to decipher what is just crazy ass bullshit from what is legitimate and deserves investigation, right? I'll be honest with you. I run out of time, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, I got to go, watch one of the kids' games. So, which, by the way, one of my kids, the middle boy, Sluggo, is heading to Florida to go to boarding school at the end of the month.
Oh boy!
Yeah, he's going to go play basketball at IMG, which is an amazing academy, amazing place.
Is that going to be hard for you? Have him go to boarding school?
Yeah, we couldn't wait to get him out of the house. No, he's a great kid. He's all the boys are fantastic, but he's very focused. He's very competitive. This is all he wants to do and he's been down there before, and they do a great job, academically and sports wise. It's very much a sports focused program.
Does he want to play professionally?
Yeah, I guess any kid that is serious about what they do at
How
the time.
tall is he?
Oh, he's about 3'2". He's a white kid from Idaho. I think he's got a big future. He's growing. He's making his way towards. He's just turned 14, and he's making his way towards 6 foot, and he'll get as tall as he needs to be for a point guard. But he's a focused. He's a focused kid.
People are doing all kinds of shit to their kids now.
They're
juicing them up with human growth hormone to get them to grow.
It's crazy, and they're reclassing him 3 or 4 times, right? Having them repeat grades.
Right,
I mean,
he's
played some kids that are, honest to God, like they show up with a baby and and.
Well, it's a fucking business. I mean, if your kid can become a legit professional athlete, I mean, there is extraordinary amounts of money in that.
Yeah.
If the kid's good.
Yeah. Again, it's, for us, you look at that, and he's very realistic, and he understands that, but he loves the game. He's super into sort of the intricacies of it, right? And he's a selfless kid. He's all about, getting the ball passed properly, getting the assist, right? He's not a selfish player, but he's also realistic about the tiny statistics in terms of who gets to even play D3 or D2 ball, right?
Right.
And then certainly going on to professional sports, but it teaches a lot of other things, right? And so boarding school for the right kid can be a great experience. It can be a terrible experience for the wrong kid, but for the right kid, it can be a great experience. Teaches them independence and discipline and motivation and the value of hard work and just not taking shit for granted, right?
How often are you going to see him?
Probably quite frequently, because he's young, so we'll be down there as often as possible. But at the same time, you want to let him run, right? You don't want to, you got to give him room.
Right.
And we've never been those sort of parents for any of the kids where we sit on the sidelines and watch their practices. That drives me fucking crazy. When you've got parents that are at every practice, sitting in their lawn chair, just watching, and you think, just let the kids do well or not.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah. So I think he's he's very independent, and I think he'll be just fine. But I forget how I jumped onto that
Boarding school.
Boarding school, yeah. Anyway, yeah, but
Yeah.
it was a struggle to get to the point where we thought, okay, let's do it, right? The other two boys were like, nah, get him out of the house. It'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine. The youngest one was like, do I get his room and all his stuff? But yeah. Anyway, and the oldest one was just out at the Naval Academy. There's a fantastic place. God, he was out there for a visit and had a chance to play some lacrosse and you know, whether he applies or not, again, it's the experience of seeing what's out there and what's possible. And you know, if you leave all the doors open for the kids and you try to get them to understand the importance of not shutting doors by stupid behavior or poor academics or whatever it is, that's all you can do as a parent. And then at some point they run and they do their thing. But, you know, from our perspective, you got to keep every door open for the kids so they don't get there and think, oh, God, I should not have done that because now I can't go there or I can't do this, right? So we'll see. But it was a great experience. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
So how we went from election meddling.
No, we went from Pee Wee Herman
Yeah.
to election meddling
Yeah.
to my kids. Yeah, you know what? Because I've got my list, I'm going to stick with my fucking list.
All right, stick with the list.
Yeah, there was one other thing I wanted to mention about how fascinating our relationship with China is, and that is also since the last time we met, the Chinese, a Chinese company, pseudo-independent supposedly, but there's very few of those, right? They've all got some level of state sponsorship or cooperation. They bought like 300 and some odd acres, right, in near Grand Forks, and there's a Grand Forks Air Force Base, which is, you know, home to whatever the 319th Fighter Wing or Air Wing, and one of the things that the base does is it oversees in part the satellite systems that we run, right, oversees surveillance drone operations to some degree. And so it's a very sensitive base. So I'll be damned if this Chinese group didn't buy up hundreds of acres of land about 12 miles from this base. And they worked with the local officials, the local folks there, to say, we want to build a milling plant, a corn milling plant. Right? The company was a food company. And it's going to be great. It's going to give you like 200 local jobs. Let's build it. And so the local officials were like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Well, it ran through the investment, CFIUS, the investment operation that looks at foreign investment to make sure that it's above board and kosher. And CFIUS said, we don't have any opinion. It's not really our domain. We don't see anything wrong with this, so we can't cancel the potential purchase. And the Air Force had another thought, and they said, screw it. No, this is a threat to national security. You can't allow this to happen. You can't allow them to build this plant. And so I'll be damned, in one of those rare moments of common sense, they shut it down. They said, you can't do this. And then that became a bit of an issue, and then started to see in Congress, you started to see all this talk about, well, oh my God, the Chinese are buying up farmland all across America.
So is Bill Gates, right?
So is Bill Gates, yeah, Bill Gates and the Chinese. Now, to be fair, the largest landowners in terms of a foreign country is Canada. So Canada owns by far the most U.S. farmland. But it was nice to see that there was some reaction, some common sense here, and that they don't do that. And that's happening. It's increasing. So I think the bright spot here is that people are becoming more aware of the problem, and that not every time is nefarious. Not every time, I'm not saying that, it's not always going to be nefarious, but you should at least be smart enough to look and see. It's like when we talk about, Chinese equipment being put on regional telecoms all over the world or the country.
Yeah.
Little things like that we should probably pay attention to.
I was watching this video where this guy was talking about these Chinese devices like a Roomba. Like it was one of those type of deals. It was like one of those robots that runs around your house and vacuums things.
Yeah, we got two of them.
And he said that it connects to a Chinese server. And it says when the thing is loading up, it's connecting to this Chinese server, and that it connects to your network. And this Chinese server potentially has access to your network and could choose to shut your network off, siphon information, do anything it wants. It's like the Internet of Things, right? So these things are connected via your network and connected to all the devices that are on your network. So if your cell phone's on it, Wi-Fi, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's been going on for some time, right? I mean, that's been the capabilities, the ability to gather intelligence from seemingly innocuous things, your fridge that talks to you or whatever. Certainly, obviously, and you've talked about this a lot, that, you know, the cell phones. And how hard you have to work to turn off applications that will do that. And most people just don't have the patience, right? You got to really dig, right? If you want to prevent your, you know, 80-inch TV in your home from being switched on remotely as a monitor of what's going on in your home, you got to really dig through the layers on that TV to get to the point where you can switch that off, right? And I mean, you know, who's got the time nowadays? But
And does that even work?
Yeah, and
Is
does it
there
even
not an override
and
switch?
does it even work? Exactly.
Robot vacuums can be used by hackers to spy on conversations, Singapore researchers say. LiDAR phone attack can take advantage of the device's built-in sensor to gather potentially sensitive data. NUS computer scientists discovered to prevent misuse, team advised owners not to connect the robot vacuums to the internet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Could be used to spy on private conversations, University said on Monday. The method, called LiDAR phone, repurposes the LiDAR sensors that a robot vacuum cleaner normally uses for navigating around a home into laser-based microphone to eavesdrop on private conversations. Oh, terrific. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty wild. And I read something about the use of Wi-Fi to see things in a home. And that there's the ability that Wi-Fi has to gather 3D images.
Yeah.
Which is fucking crazy.
Yes. I mean, a couple of...
scientists now use Wi-Fi to see through people's walls. What the fuck? Carnegie Mellon University can map human bodies through walls using Wi-Fi signals.
Not to get super creepy, but I've read that you can do that with Ethernet cables.
Ethernet cables?
Yeah, they can at least use it to hear.
Yeah, anything that emanates, anything. I mean, there's the ability to, and it does start to look like a Tom Clancy movie. Where, remember, they used to, in the old days, you see this movie and they could like use and they could identify people moving through the building, right? That was all bullshit back in the day. I mean, that was imagined, right? And people were thinking like, wouldn't that be great? And it is great, right? If you roll up on a Target site now and you're wearing the old, you know, highly advanced super soldier Google glasses, right? And you're getting all that data fed into you, right? And you're getting heat signatures, and I got 4 people on the other side of this structure. I mean, that's fantastic intelligence. Or you can, the battlefield has changed completely now. I mean, the drone capability and be able to look downfield and know what you've got.
Yeah.
To be able to reach out and touch a target without getting your guys in harm's way. I mean, it's an amazing world, but it's also pretty. What's the word? I don't want to say frightening necessarily, but it's alarming, right, for just the average citizen in terms of, again, information that's being gathered on you. And I think most people just, at this stage of the game, certainly I think maybe younger folks just don't care. Right?
Yeah, they're on TikTok.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to my friend Cam's son, and I was like, do you know that thing's fucking siphoning data off because he's on TikTok? He's like, I don't care. It's fun. I'm like, okay. Well, I guess, he's just a 24-year-old kid. He's got nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Well, that's why I
got
stopped
nothing to
doing my
hide.
TikTok dances, because I used to post all the
You
time.
were very good. I think you should bring them back.
I was doing the flossy and the rumba, or I don't even know what the dances are anymore. Anyway, today, this is, look at me segueing. Today is the 2-year anniversary of the Afghan withdrawal. I was, I forget how I got started on that one, but I was looking at total cost of what we've spent so far in Ukraine. And not only is it a 2-year anniversary of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but other comparisons we've spent in Ukraine since whenever, January 2022, so, a little over a year, obviously, a year and a half. We've dropped about upwards north of $80 billion there, right? More than that, in all honesty, because I don't think we actually know what the full number is. I don't think the State Department knows. I don't think the Pentagon actually knows. They certainly don't know necessarily where all the money's going to. But we've dropped at $80 billion, say, let's call it that. From 2001 to 2020 in Afghanistan, we spent about $74 billion. So think about that.
Wow.
Almost 20 years in Afghanistan, we spent about $73 billion. About a year and a half in Ukraine, we've spent $80 billion plus. I'm not saying it's, that we shouldn't be doing it, or that we should not be supporting the Ukrainian military. I'm just saying it's a fascinating fact as far as I'm concerned. It just shows the level of support. Ukraine is at the top of our. Obviously, we don't give that much money to anybody by far, right? And the last time a European it was at the top of the aid list was the Marshall Plan, maybe the Truman administration. So it's pretty significant. But the Afghanistan thing, 2 years after the withdrawal, we've spent since then, since the withdrawal, the U.S. government's allocated about $8 billion. Now, the interesting point there is, who's been in control there in Afghanistan since, the withdrawal? It's the Taliban. So we have allocated $8 billion to various humanitarian groups, charities, into Afghanistan, and no real controls over whether the vast majority of that money or half of that money or whatever is going to the Taliban. And
really?
And you can guarantee that it's being siphoned off.
How does that work?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. It wasn't that long ago. There was because there is an inspector general. They call him the special inspector general for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, and he testified before Congress. I think much earlier this year. It might have been the January-February timeframe, about Afghanistan, and he said, "I cannot sit here and tell the committee or the American taxpayer that we are not funding the Taliban through this money that is being allocated for Afghanistan."
Whoa.
Oh,
okay.
there you
Unfortunately, as I sit here today, I cannot assure this committee that the American taxpayer or the American taxpayer that we are not currently funding the Taliban. He continued, "Nor can I assure you that the Taliban are not diverting the money we are sending to the intended recipients, which are the poor Afghan people." Wow.
Yeah. So think about that. 20 years in Afghanistan. We leave in a fucking mess of a withdrawal, right? Which never should have taken place the way it did. And we've still got, there's maybe 155,000 special immigrant visa applicants trapped in Afghanistan waiting to get out. We have no idea how many of our former Afghan allies, right, whomever it may be, are still there trapped trying to get out.
And how many have been killed?
And how many have been killed. And in the meantime, now again, the idea at the top level, the theory, we want to help the Afghan people. We can't just abandon all those poor people. So we're going to use the money to give it to humanitarian groups, and they're going to try to feed them and everything. And yet there's no control over this fucking thing. And so that's a problem that, again, should be talked about. But we don't, we get lost in these issues of the day that aren't, really impactful. I guess at the end of the day, maybe they're impactful to people's, individual lives. I get it, whatever, what the hell. But it is stunning that then the inspector general will come out and say he can't get sufficient information from State Department and from USAID that's responsible in part for allocating these funds. And in pure, typical Washington, D.C. Bullshit, the reason is because the State Department says, well, we withdrew from Afghanistan, so therefore the Inspector General, doesn't have the same job. We're not reconstructing Afghanistan anymore, so we don't have to respond to his request for information. So, which is, it's like this bizarre, but we're going to continue to give money out. And meanwhile, the Taliban's just shitting all over the people, right? If you forget about women's rights anymore. They've shut down secondary schools. They've shut down. There's certainly no universities. They've restricted them basically to women and girls to sitting at home. They very restricted movement outside. They have to be fully covered, obviously. Recently, they just shut down all beauty salons, right? Which was one of the few places women could work and only women could go into. Women can't go into parks, right? They can't go. It's insane when you think about it that way, and you think about, yeah, but we're giving them money again, not for a bad reason, right? I mean, we want to help the people that are suffering most.
How does that money?
But we have no control.
Right. What happens to that money? Like, how could that money possibly get to the Taliban? Like, what's going on?
Well, it has to go through. It has to go through humanitarian groups, NGOs, charities, and at some point, the idea is it's either funds or goods, right, that have to be in the country, that have to get to the country to be dispersed. And the Taliban controls everything, right? Now, by the way, we also allocated a handful of billions of dollars to recapitalize the central bank there in Afghanistan. Well, that would seem to be, maybe I'm wrong, but that would seem to be basically putting money directly into the hands of the Taliban. And so it's a problem. They're looking into it. But I mean, there's so many weird. If you spend too much time looking at the way the government sometimes operates, and switching back to Ukraine and saying, okay, as an example, one of the things we're not doing is we're not fully sanctioning Russian oil because why? It's a political reason. We don't want the Russian oil taken off the market and driving gas prices up, which is bad for politics, right? So, meanwhile, one of the few real, significant sources of revenue for the Russians is oil. That allows them to keep going. So we're spending, what, $80 billion on Ukraine? At the same time, we're not doing everything we can to shut down the ability of the Russian government to make money by sanctioning the oil the way we should. And therefore, they continue marching on. I don't know. I just find it all, going back to that original thought, it's like we're going to stop fossil fuels, but we're also going to keep all the minerals in the ground. How about that?
But the Russia thing seems to be, the Russia-Ukraine thing seems to be even crazier than the Afghanistan thing in terms of long-term cost and in terms of not having any solution of how this could ever possibly end.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I agree with that. We don't have a whatever they want to call it, an exit ramp, end game. There is talk about a peace settlement, primarily from Zelensky, right? He's been making a real effort. He's been going out and trying to garner support from a variety of countries for his or for the Ukraine government's peace plan, which basically calls for return of all their lands, including Crimea, and obviously the exit of all Russian forces. And so he's out there talking and saying, this is what needs to happen. We need to gather international support for this peace plan if it's going to work, which is not incorrect, right? Meanwhile, the Chinese are trying to, play top dog in the world stage by proposing their own peace plan. Saudis are making an effort. So, but there's no exit strategy really to speak of.
But hasn't Zelensky openly stated that he wants Putin to step down?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's expressed that desire, but you also think about they've declared him a war criminal. So what's Putin's, what's Putin's motivation for stopping if he reaches a peace settlement and then is basically that's it. Okay, we're done. There's peace. We've given back all the land, and I'm a war criminal. And now at some point, if I step outside the country, I'll be arrested. And I mean, that's a thought process. So I don't think, unless Zelensky budges a little bit, right? Which, again, from an emotive standpoint, why should he, right? But unless he budges to some degree, I don't see that they're going to get a settlement where the two sides agree. Because Putin, I've said this before, but I don't imagine the Russian government giving back Crimea, right? It's too important from their perspective, from a military perspective.
And when did they take over Crimea?
Wasn't that 2014, I think? Maybe 8, maybe 2014. I don't know. It's ancient history now, and nobody cared back then, right? Really. There were some angry memos written Obama talked about it at the time and said, but nobody did anything. Just like when the troops moved into eastern Ukraine, nobody really cared. Nobody did anything. Nobody was out there planting flags in their gardens and saying, we stand with Ukraine. And in fact, Ukraine was viewed as a highly corrupt place, where, a Ukrainian energy company would hire the son of the vice president.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can't, we can't allow Putin's adventurism, right, to stand. You've got to. So I do believe we have to support, and without our support, without our NATO allies' support and others, they wouldn't have been able to accomplish what they've done, right? And now whether they can make the counteroffensive a significant victory or not still remains to be seen, because the Russians, they used the opportunity during the lull to really dig in, right? They've created almost their own Maginot Line, although it's more effective than the old Maginot Line. So they've created that along their perimeter, and it's been a real tough slog. The Ukrainian counteroffensive has gone much slower than people thought. And everybody was all very emotive. Oh, it's going to be a counteroffensive. They're going to sweep through. It's going to be done here soon. And I don't think people still have their heads around the fact that there's no exit out there right yet. So what are we going to do? Are we going to continue to just allocate every couple of months? We say, well, we'll put another $800 million in there. We've already approved F-16s, Abrams tanks, Patriot missile systems. I mean, HIMARS. We're doing everything possible: intelligence support, satellite support, and again, rightly so. Putin, needs to be driven out of there if possible. But at the same time, they need a logical thought process about how you have a settlement, if there's going to be one.
And what are your feelings about NATO's encroaching on Russian territory, like getting closer and closer? Like the treaty at the end of the Soviet Union stated that NATO would not move any closer to Russia, but yet they have. And yet they have,
yeah. And it had just the opposite effect, right? I mean, what Putin did, because he's, I think he imagined, and he had bad intel, but he imagined that this incursion, this invasion was going to show the cracks in NATO, right? And it had the opposite. It grew NATO. And so, look, he legitimately believes, you have to understand the motivations of whoever's on the other side of the table. And with Putin, he legitimately believed that, the collapse of the Soviet Union was a terrible, terrible tragedy, right? And he's been trying to recreate in some fashion the whole thing. So he looks at that, and that's just further, that reinforces his mindset, which is, in his mind, I don't think he's making this up. In his mind, he believes, this is an attack on the motherland. Now, it's bullshit. It's not. But that's how he pitches it, and that's how he tries to keep the population behind him, by saying this is the West against us. Right? And
there's no argument for that, you don't think, with NATO encroaching?
Well, I think every country has got the right to take actions to protect their own national security.
Right, like if Russia started moving military bases into Mexico.
Yeah,
right, which is kind of similar to what NATO's done.
Oh, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, that was the same concept. There was no difference, right? So yes, I mean, and so you have to be pragmatic about the world that you live in, and you have to understand, and that requires good intelligence. You have to understand the plans and intentions and motivations of whoever, again, is on the other side of the table, or whatever dictator or whatever leader you're dealing with. And I think that is it helpful in reaching a peace settlement? Look, if all your goal is, and maybe we need to say that, okay, is the U.S. goal to drive Russia completely out and reclaim all the lands that they had taken since 2000, right? Then fine, that's our stated goal, and we just keep doing everything possible to make that happen, short of boots on the ground. But it would seem to me that our goal should also be, instead of that, maybe we find a way to end the war, right? Typically, you get into a war and you want to end it, right? I mean, you don't want it to go on for 20 years. So
unless you are supplying weapons and making billions of dollars, then you might want to keep it going for a little while.
There is that, and look, but look, there's you get 2 bites of the apple, right? You get to supply all the weaponry, and then you get the reconstruction.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you right now, there is an undercurrent in Washington D.C. amongst contractors that are just they're just super gleeful. Not, that's the wrong word, but they're enthusiastic and anticipatory. I don't know if that's a word about this potential. And I saw this back during the Iraq days, right, when we went in to reconstruct Iraq, right, which went on for several years, produced massive amounts of fraud. Created all sorts of bullshit 8A companies, right? Everybody was looking for women-owned or Native American-owned or Eskimo-owned companies that they could set up, so that would allow them to get those government contracts to go in and do some piece of reconstruction, whether they had experience to do it or not. And there was the amount of energy that was involved in D.C. at the time of companies just shooting up out of nowhere, right? I remember people walking through the door. We had an office in D.C. For the business, and people walking through the door with, looking for security, right, and saying, well, we're going to start this company, we're going to go out there. And I was like, well, how much experience do you have? We don't have any. They didn't care. So I sense that same level of excitement in the idea of the Ukraine reconstruction, because that's going to be talk about the next sinkhole of, again, you got to support them, right? So maybe I'm using the wrong terminology, but the next black hole of cost of money spent will be on the reconstruction effort. And if we think that it's currently expensive, wait till that hits, right? That's going to make this $80 billion so far look like nothing, I think. That's just my opinion. But so I don't know. There's no, I keep talking in circles about this because I don't see any way out of it, right? It's both sides are not going to budge, at least in the short term, midterm, on what they want.
Are you concerned at all about the possible use of nukes?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Medvedev has thrown that out every now and then, right? He's kind of alluded to it. Nothing's off the table, but Putin's still a rational player, right? He may seem like he's irrational at times, or this was an incredibly stupid move, but I don't think he's off the rails. He understands that can't be on the table as an option. So I'm not really worried about that. I'm more worried about the long, slow slog that we find. Look, nobody ever anticipated we'd be in Afghanistan for 20 years.
Right.
And look at this. I mean, it's a perfect case study of you probably should have an end in mind, right? Otherwise, it just keeps going because some people unfortunately do benefit from it. Some major players out there who benefit from that sort of thing, and other people trying to do the right thing for sure, of course. But you would think that Afghanistan you would have a perfect case study, but we didn't have a case study. Sorry, I take that back. We had a case study in what the Soviets did in Afghanistan, and we didn't learn shit from that. Right? When we went in, we ended up making the same mistakes, make the same hubris. Look, there were years where we knew during that 20 years that there were immense weaknesses and corruption inside the government, the Afghan government and the military. We knew for years that the Afghan military was problematic. Right? And so this idea that we were surprised or shocked that they fell apart in a matter of hours, basically, as the withdrawal was taking place, is just bullshit. We just ignored it. We didn't want to hear it. We didn't want to tell the truth about it. And so if we had been truthful, we would have said, no, this isn't going to work, And by the way, we never, look, that withdrawal was a disaster. We gave up Bagram Air Base. Right? What the fuck were we doing? Right? Yeah. If we're going to withdraw and pull everybody out and get all our allies and contacts and people who had supported us for all those years out, we had the perfect resource to do that, and we didn't. They shut it down, and then they used Hamid Karzai Airport, and that was just from a simple security process. I mean, we do security assessments on large, facilities, and it's not rocket science. Right? You see the same things over and over again in terms of how you protect your assets and how you protect your people and how you move things. That's a part of a logistical exercise. And they just fucking ignored it. And they ended up using this airport. People died as a result, didn't have to. They should never have. And yet, and then they come out with a bullshit assessment earlier this year, the White House does, and basically blames the Trump administration for, cutting a deal with the Taliban with a timeline that had conditions which the Taliban never met and which we didn't have to stick with, frankly. And yet, we thought politically the optic would be bad if we didn't. And so they decided to withdraw. And they did it in a disgustingly, insecure fashion. And, they blame that. They blame the intel community. And yes, the way that we characterized the ability of the Afghan military and government to hold together was abysmal. Right. So that was a serious mistake. But the steps that were then taken in terms of leading up to that and the speed with which they tried to do it was, that's on them. So anyway, that's a cheery little conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound fun.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't sound like there's a good solution here.
Well, no. And then, so we got that. I have no idea where with Ukraine. Because sure, there's diplomatic efforts underway that we don't see, that aren't on the radar, right? So aside from Zelensky trying to garner support for his deal, obviously we've got the U.S. is doing other things, but the public wouldn't know it, and I think the government and the military, government in particular, the White House, needs to be better at explaining things, right? What's going on, and why we're doing this, right? Because you don't want military aid in particular, to dry up to the Ukrainian government. But, if they don't do a better job of explaining why we're spending this money, people are going to get fed up, or they're going to start questioning, is this really something that we should be worried about?
Right.
And, it's tough when you got problems at home. It's tough to get people to focus on something as large as, you don't want the recreation of the Soviet Union, because then that might encourage China on Taiwan, and then, anyway.
Yeah. Are you concerned about that?
About Taiwan?
Yeah.
Yes, is the answer. Because I think Xi looks at what's happening in Ukraine, and he probably thinks, all right, that's Russia, small GDP, equal to a European country. Small European country. He looks at China and says, okay, is the West really going to, go into a proxy war over Taiwan? And I think their calculation is probably no. So I think from their perspective, it's a matter of time. And they're probably calculating, can we do this in a slow, sort of soft war way, where we just cede the ground and eventually we have Taiwan, much like, with Hong Kong, where we eventually we look and go, oh, Hong Kong, right? It used to be a bastion of democracy in that little spot. And they put the squash on that. So, I think that's a real problem. And I think Xi views this as important to do during his time, right? I don't think he's going to want to leave that on the table and not have that as part of his legacy, right? So I think the timeline has been accelerated, and it may well be that the timeline is essentially, how long does Xi view himself in power? So I think that's a problem. But, do we honestly believe that we're going to put boots on the ground in Taiwan to fight the Chinese regime? I don't think so. So what does that mean? Right? Do we just? It's a problem. But I don't know that we're overly focused right now. We tend to do one thing at a time, as a government. Right now, the thing is Ukraine.
What is the difference between the way that Taiwan operates their government and the way China would operate it if they took over?
Well, part of it's access, right? And given Taiwan's importance in sort of in the tech sector, their chip manufacturing, and that would create potentially another real bind in the supply chain system, right? For future use. Right? You have to think about down the road. If we got into a major conflict with China at some point, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to stop anything they can, right? That would help us, right? So their ability to restrict the importation of chips necessary for much of our economy now in terms of running. That's a sort of a key point. That's more of a practical economic issue, right? Then you've got the issue of, well, look, it's a democracy, right? Are we just going to let another democracy get rolled by the communist government? That sounds like an old 1960s Cold War theory, but yeah, the reality is our values and what we think important, right, say one thing. The realities of how that would play out say something else, right? So again, it's hard to marry those up. How far would we go down the road to protect Taiwan? And so maybe what that means is, down the road we need to be better at, manufacturing on our own. We got to bring things back, which is part of what's all that talk about onshoring and bringing manufacturing back. Well, that's part of it. Underlying that is our concern over national security issues. Should they get, control of more commodities, whatever you want to refer to. Well,
that was one of the more shocking things about the pandemic was when you realize how dependent we are on China for medicine, for chips, for so many different things that they produce that we don't produce over here. And, how did we allow that to happen? And did we just allow that to happen because there's higher profit margins and we put the entire country at risk because of that?
I think it was, we got addicted to cheap stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Both, cheap stuff and high tech cheap stuff. So, listen to me, boy, that's a smart fellow there. And so I think that was part of it. It at the time it made sense, right? And we didn't imagine at the time. Look, we had the opening of our relationship with China, and it was going to be a new day, right? We went through that with the Cold War, right? And we finished the Cold War. The wall fell. And suddenly we're all like, oh, there's got to be a peace dividend here, right? We keep repeating the same mistakes. We came out of World War II, as an example. This may not be the best example, but we came out of World War II. At the time, we had the Office of Strategic Services, which was the predecessor to the CIA. So World War II ends, and the next day, Truman says, thanks very much. Now close the doors on the OSS. Right, sent Bill Donovan home. Don't let the screen door hit your ass on the way out. And they shut it down because they imagined, that's it. Well, why do we possibly need this organization that's out there doing special operations and gathering intelligence? And we won. And so they stopped it. And then the Soviets went on the march, and suddenly they were like, okay, fuck it, maybe we need it. So they started the CIA. Right, and that's the lesson that should have been learned from there. Was you're always going to need an intel apparatus that helps support national security concerns. So there was that. Then we had the opening of a relationship again with China, and I think there was this imagining that suddenly things were different. Right, we were gonna grow, and that really the entire interconnectedness of our economies just blew up at that point. It really expanded, and so we maybe didn't see exactly what their plans and intentions and motivations were, and we always mirror our values, right? So, we imagine everybody's marching towards democracy, and that's not how it works. So I think that's in part how we ended up in this situation. But now there's more effort and more understanding, I think, to go ahead and onshore and be more concerned about the supply chain. And you're right, the pandemic pointed that out. Right, pretty clearly, and I think maybe that helped accelerate the process. But it's going to take years. Look, it takes years just to do the simple things, right? We talked about the mining issue and critical minerals and the things that we need to lessen our dependence on China's control over critical minerals. You're talking about 6, 8, 9, 10 years, right, to get a mine open in the U.S., right? So. You think down the road, we better, I guess my point is we better accelerate our ability to do this, right? Just to be pragmatic. Maybe, hopefully one day we're all holding hands and everybody's singing Kumbaya and, unicorns are flying out our ass. But I think it's probably not going to happen. So we just need to be a little more aware. Yeah. I sound very cynical.
Well, with good reason. It seems like a good time to be a little bit cynical.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, um, yeah. I remember my wife told me yesterday when I was leaving. She says, "Try to be more positive, more optimistic." Yeah, she said. She says, "I worry. You always sound like you're really negative, and you always
Well, you're just informed.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's the problem.
I think I've spent enough time. I've gotten very cynical about the way that countries interact with each other and our ability to be realistic about that rather than just design strategies based on what we'd hope for or what we feel like would be good to happen.
Right.
So maybe that's part of it.
What's your take on all this UAP disclosure shit?
I'm shocked that you would ask that.
Come on, man.
Yeah, that was a fascinating hearing. That was a fascinating hearing.
Yeah.
And
was it shocking at all to you?
No. I think I mean it was. I loved listening but I can't say that anything came out of it, even with Dave Grush's testimony. I mean, he kind of come out there before, but I think a couple of things. I think it's excellent that we're actually having these hearings and that there's a subcommittee and that they're actually looking at this issue, because I think the more transparency, the problem the government's had in the past is not being transparent enough. And so I think that was great. I think David Fravor, I've had a chance to sit with him in the past. And
what was your impression?
I think he's very credible. I was talking with Jamie earlier. You don't get to that point, right? You're not a commanding officer on a carrier. He was on the Nimitz at the time in 2004. You don't get to that point by being irrational or hallucinating up in the air or just being whimsical. And the same with the other fellow, Ryan Graves, the other pilot. He was flying Hornets out of Virginia Beach about 10 years later when he reported on some of these incidents. So that, to me, is very credible. And I have not seen anything from the Pentagon or from the government that, as an example, explains Fravor's encounter. And also, I mean, look, he had a wingman. Her name was Alex Dietrich. She was a lieutenant commander at the time. She observed the same thing. And they have radar lock, right, down on the carrier. They knew what they were... There wasn't just one person looking up in the sky and saying, "Oh, I see a light," or "I see something." Right? This was a very legit sighting, and there's been no explanation as to what it is. So it is a legitimate UAP, unidentified, anomalous or anomaly, phenomena, and so I think that's one thing. I find David Fravor extremely credible. I've never met Ryan Graves, but again, given his experience and given the fact that he wasn't the only person seeing this, right, off of Virginia Beach back in 2014.
And with Ryan Graves, when they upgraded their sensors, they upgraded the capabilities of these jets. That's when they started seeing all these things. And he said it was shocking that they were encountering them all the time.
Yeah, and some of those, fine. You can, whatever they may be, they're just, you've got a more sophisticated system on board. You're just seeing things out there that you wouldn't have picked up before. Okay, and so some of those things then become maybe sightings that then are explained, right? What is it? Is it a balloon? Is it a drone? Whatever it may be. But when you get an experienced pilot flying by and saying, "Hey, I saw something. It was a cube inside a sphere." Well, okay. Well, let's at least log it, record it without any criticism or pushback. Right? Have a way to investigate, and that's been their problem, and that's what they talked about during the hearing. Also, again, they've talked about this before, but if you stigmatize, the pilots that are seeing these things, then of course you're only getting. And what did Graves say? He said like 5% get reported, right? So, and that's because nobody wants to, get back on deck or land and say, "Yeah, I saw something. I saw a UAP or I saw a UFO back in the day." So you have to make the system more accessible, right, for the sightings. And then you have to have a way for national security purposes to investigate them.
What do you think
Yeah.
these things are?
I don't know.
What's your gut?
Yeah. I think. I think the logic of saying that we're doing this because if you have something out there that you observe that you can't identify propulsion or any sort of known to us systems, then yeah, that's a problem. So, is it a hostile element? Is there, first of all, is it just something that is showing up on the radar and it's a natural phenomenon and it's a whatever parallax or whatever they call it? Then fine. Or is it something from a foreign government, that new technology being developed, propulsion systems, materials science, whatever it may be, and they are working on these things all the time, right? Hypersonics is the perfect example, right? The Chinese and the Russians are, frankly, still ahead of us in hypersonic capabilities, right? Because they've invested longer and more effort into developing hypersonics systems. So you have to figure out, is it a hostile foreign government doing this? And then the other part is, all right, well, is it whatever Dave Grush says, non-human, or is it a legitimately not from Earth? That can't be taken off the table, right? I mean, look, it's we've said this before. I'm not smart enough to know what I don't know, right? I mean, well, maybe I am, but we've explored such a tiny part of space, right, that it would be ridiculous for us to think that we don't, that we can write it off, right? That it's not there, right? I have no idea, right? But I do know that you can't discount anything because, again, going back to the reason why you do it, it's in our national security interest to figure out what the hell it might be. And at some point, if you start with, like right now, the new office is whatever it's called, typical government, the all-domain anomaly resolution office, right? That's what they came up with.
Hilarious.
At the Pentagon, yeah. So this guy or this person, Dr. Kirkpatrick, runs it, I think. He's the director. And they've said they've got, upwards of 800 cases that they're investigating. So,
jeez.
Yeah, and it's growing. I mean, some reports say it's growing by like 100, 150 cases a month, right, in terms of sightings. They then get logged in, and now they've got to investigate. Well, that's a smart thing, right? They do that. And maybe you take off 90% of them or even more, but you end up with this short list of things, perhaps like the Tic Tac in 2004 with David Fravor, where you just don't have an explanation. Okay, fine. Then be more transparent about it, right? And Ryan Graves said something interesting during the hearings, and he said that if the general public or if Congress could see the sensor and video data that he's seen, then it would change the national conversation, right? That's a really interesting statement from a experienced former pilot, right, from an F-18 pilot. So that deserves more scrutiny, right? And that also means, well, maybe the government should release a few more, videos that they may have. Maybe they should release some of it because they haven't released radar data. They haven't really been open about that, and so there's still information or data points on the Tic Tac, for instance, that hasn't been released. It's considered still classified. Well, you know what? What the fuck? Tell us why not. I mean, what is it? I mean, if you honestly haven't figured out whether it's foreign technology or not, then maybe you should put it out there, and maybe the commercial sector will help you in that investigation, right?
What would be the motivation to not be transparent about it? And is there any possibility that any of this stuff is ours? Like the Tic Tac. Is it possible that there's some black ops thing going on where they've developed some advanced system of propulsion that is completely independent from burning fossil fuels and shooting them out the back to propel something to go forward?
Yeah. Yes is the answer. I think there is that possibility, and one thing that Dave Grush said, look, I don't know about his comments about, because he was speaking from, look, I haven't seen any of this. You know, I've gotten it from interviewing, you know, dozens of witnesses. This is, you know, what I know, and this is what I believe now. But one thing that he did say was that he believes, and he's seen, he says, evidence that the government is misappropriating funds, right, in order to prevent government oversight of certain programs. Right? Now, is that true? I don't know, but is it a practice that has occurred in the past where they will bury a program, right, inside another budget? And the answer is yes. That they've done that, you know, repeatedly for secrecy reasons, right? And as a matter of fact, that was the premise for America's favorite show, Black Files Declassified.
That is America's favorite show.
It is America's. Yes.
I think you're the host of it.
I was as America's TV sweetheart for a while, and so the premise of that show was follow the money, right?
Right.
And it's a great premise, right? I mean, look, because at some point, just like with the Biden administration, you know, situation, and they're looking at their bank records, there will be a trail somewhere. That money has to eventually show up somewhere. And usually it's a line item that's not easily explained, usually in some mundane terms, whatever it might be. So Graves is absolutely correct in the sense that that's something worth looking at, right? And if there are programs like that, then the reason is, okay, we're keeping it secret because we don't want the Chinese regime to know, or we don't want the Russians to know. And so, you know, again, having come from where I come from, I get it, sources and methods. And there are reasons for secrets at times. But if that's not the case, then I see no reason not to be more open and transparent about some of the other information that they may have and the sightings they have. You know, I know Graves was talking about they've got biologics and, you know, those things.
Did Graves say that? I know that.
Oh, not Graves.
Grush.
No, Grush said that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was not Graves.
Grush said there's frozen bodies.
Yeah.
And that there's a crash retrieval program.
Crash retrieval. That was a big one. That caused a big stir. It's been running for decades, he said. I think he said that the government, in his opinion, based on his interviews, as he was working, I think, with the National Reconnaissance Office, and he was tasked with going around and, you know, identifying the programs that were related to UAPs. He said that the U.S. government was likely aware of non-human activities since like the 1930s. Now, what I would say is, based on my years of experience with the government, it's really hard for them to keep a secret, right? And that's a monumental secret. And at some point, you know, it's human activity and human nature. Someone's going to open up their pie hole and
Wasn't
talk.
that what Bob Lazar did?
Yeah.
And now when you pay attention to some of the video footage that has been released about these unidentified objects, and when you listen to what Bob Lazar said about how these things operate, it mimics that. Not only that, like the way he described the propulsion method.
Whoa. That's a
Good save.
Yeah, thank you very
All
much.
right.
I set the whole studio on fire.
It mimics what he said. He also talked about, you know, that there was some possibility that there was this crash retrieval program is what he was working on, but he said there was some talk about biological entities.
Yeah, and there's mixed feelings about how, you know, how reliable Bob Lazar, you know, was. I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not a new assertion, right? I mean, there's been talk about this before. So,
but that's my point about secrecy.
Yeah, and I think. But if that's, I guess, my point on that is, not only that people can't keep their pie hole shut, but there would have been more detailed information. That something would have come out. That again, that's my own feeling. I just have a hard time believing the government is that good at keeping a secret. Right? Sometimes it just seems like they can't organize panic in a doomed submarine. So I think that's from my perspective, that's a question mark, right? Could they keep this secret that they've got frozen bodies of aliens sitting somewhere?
Wouldn't you imagine, though, that if there was something like that, that the level of attention to detail to protect secrecy would be significantly ramped up? This wouldn't be something as simple as developing a new fighter jet where, you have these, you essentially have these corporations that design these vehicles for the U.S. government. You have defense contractors. And one of the assertions was that these are the people that have access to these things because they're trying to back engineer it. And if you were going to back engineer it, you would do so under the guise of someone who makes those things. It's not like the government themselves are the engineers and the people that are involved. It's people that work for the government and often defense contractors.
Well, contractors, government entities, agencies.
Right.
I mean, look, the CIA was responsible for locating the ground where Area 51 sits, right? All those years ago. So they would have a role to play. You're right. The commercial world would have a role to play. The defense contractors, others, I'm sure. I mean, it becomes a growing circle of people who would be involved in an effort like that.
But it'd be a fun secret to keep.
It'd be a hell of a secret to keep. But
that would be a fun one.
Yeah.
If you're working on something like that, boy, could I tell you some shit.
You go home, the kids say, "What'd you do today, Dad?" And you're like,
I touched metal that's from another planet.
Yeah, I dissected an alien.
They 3D printed model designed to house 3-foot tall creatures from another galaxy.
But but I think we do also tend to imagine. Look, we can only when we look at when Fravor. It was interesting. Fravor looks at the Tic Tac, right? And Dietrich, and they're looking at this and they're trying to interpret it based on what we know right now, right? So our technological limitations, right, kind of define how we imagine things could go, right? But we only know physics in the way that we know it, right? So it is interesting to think about how we put it, which is how you ended up with little green men, right? Well, if they're aliens, they probably look like us, sort of, but let's make them a little different, let's make them 3 foot tall. But who knows what the hell it looks like out there, right? And it's just, but I guess, we've explored so little of space, right? I mean, we still don't know what's, in all the oceans, right? We're still surprised when we find something in the oceans.
Well, that's what's fascinating also about these stories, that there seems to be these vehicles that can travel into the water as well. Yeah. And this has been documented by video as well.
Yeah, and that's what they first noticed, right? I mean, with the Tic Tac was they noticed a disturbance in the water, right? The water was roiling, and they said the weather was perfect, right? There were no white caps, there was nothing. There was just this one area of disturbance, and that was the first thing they noticed. And then they saw the whatever it was. But again, I go back to okay, I'm buying what Fravor's selling, right? It's just that then we don't have what's at the end of that dotted line. We don't know what it is, but I'm glad that we're exploring it in a more serious way now. I'm glad that the Pentagon, to at least, and maybe it happens incrementally, right? But at least they've come out now. They said, okay, we have ATIP, or the Advanced Aeronautical Threat Identification Program, which supposedly shut down in 2012 or so, 2012, I think it was. Of course, they didn't shut it down, right? They just put it into a different program, and because the threat was still there, right? There's still concern over, okay, what is flying over particularly sensitive facilities, right? There was that swarming, right? Or the swarm that went around the USS Omaha,
right?
I think, right?
The ones that look like pyramids.
Yeah, yeah. And so there were like 9 of them, or I think at a maximum there were 9 of them, and they still haven't figured out what the hell that is.
But did those things exhibit in any sort of capabilities that are beyond our imagination? I don't think they operated at an insane
movement. Not necessarily. They disappeared in a way that couldn't be explained, right? And a couple of them appeared to just go into the water. To your point about there's been those incidents.
Transmedium devices.
So and they did have radar imagery on these items, but you know, and I think so. Anyway, what they might be, you know, again, it's nothing was solved as a result of the hearing, right? Obviously, and I think people were excited, and they're always excited when there's going to be something like this in the previous hearing, and you know, this world, this UAP world, starts talking, but you know, every hearing ends up the same way in a sense because we don't get a resolution, which then leads to more suspicion that the government's hiding something, which has always been the case, right? For decades now, that's where it tends to end up. Well, the government's hiding something. They're just not telling us. There is the possibility that they just don't fucking know, right? And rather than holding on to evidence and trying to keep it a secret, which, again, you know, it's tough.
But do you think that if it's ours, like say the Tic Tac is ours, is it possible that the government could create some advanced propulsion system and do so in complete secrecy as well?
Well, that's 19 years ago.
Yes.
And, you know, 19 years we hold on to, you know, that sort of capability and technology and for whatever reason don't deploy it.
Right.
Yeah, look, I mean, yeah, as an aside, the CIA, we've got it used to be called Science and Technology, right? It's where they create all the gear, all the amazing things. The Science and Technology Directorate at the agency over the years has developed incredible things, right? Responsible for the U-2, responsible for satellite capabilities, battery technology, right? All the things that they've done over the years. And oftentimes they'd create just sort of gadgetry, right? And I don't want to simplify it and minimize it, but it's important stuff, but, you know, for lack of a better word. And oftentimes there was a concern. We don't want to release this. We don't want to put it out in the field to be used because we don't want it to fall into, you know, into the wrong hands, right? And then they realize that we've got this capability, right? So it's much like we talked about before. If you get a target in your sights, maybe you want to watch that target for a period of time to understand what it's capable of doing, what it's doing. You don't want to just let out, you know, okay, well, we're going to. So, yeah, is it possible we developed a new propulsion system and, you know, we're just playing a game where we're saying, okay, we're still working on hypersonics, you know, and air-breathing engines, and we're trying to see what we can do here. And you know, and meanwhile, we've got this in our back pocket, right, waiting for someday. It's a possibility. In my mind, I think, hey, if that's the case, good on them for being smart enough to be that clever and also to be able to keep a secret.
Is that more plausible than it coming from another planet, in your opinion? Or another dimension, or whatever the explanation is?
You know what? That's a great question. You should have your own podcast. Yeah, you know, is it more plausible? But
I mean,
you know
what I'm saying is like this. It's
yeah.
so revolutionary. Like,
Yeah.
if they do have this thing that is the ability to go from 50,000 feet above sea level to 50 feet in a second, something that defies our current understanding of, at least assuming there's a biological entity inside that thing. Let's assume there is.
Yeah.
You know, one of the examinations of the video footage that they got from the jets, they said the way that thing took off, any biological being would be turned into jello.
Yeah.
You
Which
would
is
you would be pink mist.
Yeah. It's not
just
the
the G-force.
It's not the speed. It's the acceleration of the stopping that kills you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I would assume it's unmanned if that's the case.
Well, there's no
you know.
windows in that thing.
Right,
It was completely.
So I guess the answer to your question is I don't know.
It seems a long time.
Is it more plausible than being from outside this world? Yeah, it's a good question because I don't want to deny the fact that, I mean, I think it's incredible hubris to say that there's nothing else out there. Right?
Of course.
And so I don't want to lock myself into that corner of the room. But at the same time, that would represent a massive leap in material science as at least we're aware of it.
Right.
And oh, look, I have a call. It's Paul Rubens calling me from beyond. So too soon. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. I mean, it speaks to, again, one of my points that because I'm so cynical, I just have a hard time believing that the U.S. government could keep secrets like that for that period of time, right? I have
Right,
a really
19
hard
years.
time believing that. Yeah.
Right.
So
So what would have to take place in order for the government to be developing something that's so superior to what we understand in terms of what's possible with propulsion systems? Like, how would they fund that? How would they hide that? How would they get the scientists involved and the engineers? What would they have to do in order to develop something like this?
Well, it would be similar. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to a program, right? So, and inside the government and the military, you develop a program, you come up with an idea. Okay, this is what we want to do.
Right.
We think this is possible, or we're going to work to make this happen.
And there
right?
has been some discussion of magnetic propulsion systems.
Yes. Yeah.
And gravity propulsion systems, something that defies what we understand is possible today. Way back in the 60s, they were talking about this.
Yeah,
and theoretically.
and more recently too. I mean, there's been some although theoretically they looked at it in the recent past and said it's just it's not worth pursuing. But to your question, the program concept would be the same. You have that, and then you say, okay, now we gotta allocate a budget to it, right? We got to do that. Obviously, it's so sensitive.
It has to be an enormous budget.
It has to be an enormous budget. Look, I mean, but the known U.S. defense budget now roughly is $800 billion a year or so, a little over probably, give or take.
So
a
you
few billion.
could siphon some of that off.
You would
to
move
some
yeah.
program.
You would
move it to a program.
Put it as a line item in some other innocuous program, and then that has happened when we're talking about developing something as sort of not say pedestrian, but as straightforward as like surveillance aircraft, right? Then you put that money somewhere else. You develop the program. You get the team that's going to be working on it, whether it's at Skunk Works or somewhere, right? But you sometimes have to turn to the same usual suspects, right? Which is why I bring up Skunk Works, right? And you have to do these, because there's, at the end of the day, there's not that many material scientists with that, capability, a level of intelligence and experience. And so then you go from there and you work like hell to keep it secret, which, again, if they've done that, I consider that that'd be a great win, because right now, we're still trying to play a little bit of catch up on hypersonics, and that's the next theater, right? I mean, aside from cyber warfare and warfare in space, and space has already been weaponized. Hypersonics is it, right? And so, we're already seeing deployment of hypersonic. And look, to be fair, okay, ballistic missiles, it's all. The difference between a hypersonic and a ballistic missile is a maneuverability, right? Which creates at the speed. It creates you keep shortening the gap for response time, right? So if you fire an ICBM, you know what the trajectory is. A hypersonic, glide vehicle, you don't know, right? It comes at you so fast, and it comes from different directions, and you can't predict. So it defeats air defense systems, which is why it's so important. But we're still playing catch up there. So,
is this what we're saying publicly, that we're playing catch up? And is it possible that we aren't playing catch up?
It's possible, sure. And again, I would hope so. That'd be great if that's the case. But
would it be possible that they would keep that a secret?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was in charge of that program, I would say, why would we give up our capabilities?
Right.
So yes, to go back to your original, if they develop this alternative propulsion system and again, part of this is the material science, right? Because you're punching through the air, at such a speed that it's changing everything, right? It's changing the dynamics of flight. It is a massive hurdle to overcome, but that's what everybody's working on. So, were they capable of working on this and they developed something like that, or were testing it back 19 years ago when Fravor saw whatever he saw? Yeah, it's a great sort of theoretical exercise to think about that. And
because the reason why I say this is, I don't know why I have these instincts, but because I'm a UFO nut, right? Clearly,
I've not heard
Fucking
that.
look around.
Nobody says that.
They should. I'm on board.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's bullshit. I don't feel like it's real, and I don't know why I feel like it's fake. I wonder
what do you mean by that? What's
all
fake?
the Grush stuff, all
Okay,
the
yeah.
disclosure stuff, all the biological entities, the recovered vehicles, the recovery program, the back engineering program. There's something about it to me that just seems like bullshit. And I don't know why I have this overwhelming instinct that's bullshit.
So do you think Rush is like part of the?
I don't think he's. I think he's probably what they would call a useful idiot.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not disparaging him in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's telling the truth, I'm very happy that he came forward. I think what he did is very courageous.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying that if I wanted to release some bullshit and I wanted to put out a fake narrative to obscure something that we're working on, that's how I would do it. I would get some information to a guy and encourage him to leak it, and then encourage him to have these hearings and talk about all this stuff and put all this weirdness out there where it kind of confuses the narrative, like what is real and what's not real. I just something about it to me, and this is again, but here's part of my feeling on it too. If disclosure was real, if we really are visited and we have been being visited since the beginning of time, wouldn't that, maybe my feeling is that would seem so alien that would seem fake anyway. Because I always felt like if there was a moment of disclosure, if there was a moment where, you know, the president got on television and gave a press conference and said, we are not alone. And we know this for a fact now, and this is our concern. This is what we have to worry about in terms of national security, in terms of whether or not they're malevolent. I feel like that by itself would be so alien, even if it was true, that it would seem fake. And so that's my conflict. My conflict is I'm wondering, does it seem like bullshit to me? Because if it is real, it would be so bizarre that it would necessarily seem like bullshit. Or is it just too tidy for me? Does it just not seem right? Because it just doesn't. It just doesn't seem right. And this is, again, I'm not calling anyone a liar.
Right,
I'm not.
right.
It just seems like bullshit, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I think part of it is we're kind of conditioned to assume that the government hides information from us, right? Oftentimes not for any necessary national security reasons, just because it's such a large operation, and it can sometimes seem very whimsical or capricious why they don't, provide some level of disclosure about things. But I think with Grush, I think here's my take on it. I think he believes what he's saying, right? I think he has gone out there. I think I'm legit. Look, he was a 14-year veteran of military and National Reconnaissance Office, and I think he went out and he talked to enough people, and he believes it. I don't think he's out there like spinning a yarn and is worried that now he's gotten over his skis and he's said too many things, and now I don't know. I don't feel like it's tidy, and maybe the difference between us is I spent a lot of time with the government, and the government is sometimes can be really, really dysfunctional, and it goes back to keeping a secret. The idea that they could have this what essentially is a covert action campaign, to spread disinformation about what they actually know, right? When the easier thing to do is just to have the program, if it's the U.S. government's development of technology, right, and we're doing this, to have the program and just keep your yap shut about it, not go for a disinformation campaign, not try to muddy the waters by doing this, because in a sense, you're just creating more conversation around it. You're creating, now there's a little bit of a, movement within Congress to say we have to do this. Now we have to. So they're going to look perhaps for a misappropriation of funds, right? Because they're not going to pursue like the UAP issue necessarily, right? But they might be interested in pursuing the misappropriation of funds. So if you're running a program, if it didn't, again, going back to the idea that it's a U.S. government thing, if you're running a program, that's the last thing you want to do is because you're doing this program to avoid government oversight. You're not going to create, this alternative narrative that, could generate the sort of publicity or the conversation, particularly up on Capitol Hill, that causes them to then start looking and saying, well, where is money being spent?
Right.
Right? Because there is a trail there, and that could
Right.
cause a problem. Yeah.
What are your instincts when you look at it? If I'm looking at it, I'm saying something's wrong. It seems like bullshit. What are your instincts?
Yeah, I think I would like to. I don't think we're going to get there. But my instinct is to say, how do we solve this, or how do we come to some sort of logical resolution, as opposed to saying what is it right off the bat. My instinct is to say, all right, if the all domain anomaly resolution office has 800 cases, then tell us what those 800 cases are. Let's work our way through them, or have a little bit more transparency about working through those cases. Again, you'll probably whittle them down, right? We were doing black files and we were going around talking to people about, various sightings and things. You're basically just crossing things off, going, okay, that was this, that was this, that was this. You find some pretty mundane answers, but you whittle it down to maybe one or two things that you can't explain, and then you can investigate those and say, okay, well, all right, let's dig further on these. But right now it's just like all over the map, and they've got so many cases, and they just kind of lump it all together. Are they doing that to obfuscate and create, this situation where it does seem like bullshit? And I don't know, but I think I'm not willing to shut the door on saying that those handful of those few sightings where we do have technical data, we got video, we got radar lock, we got gun camera footage, whatever it may be, that can't be explained. I'm not willing to close the door and saying, well, it's is it, because who knows? Maybe China's doing the same thing. Oh, we're leading the hypersonic race right now, great, but they've got another program, and they were responsible for the Tic Tac, right? So we have to pursue it, and if that leads us to the doorstep that says, oh, that's a U.S. government program and they've developed the technology, okay. Fine, but I realize that I'm not willing to close the door on saying it could be something else. It could be otherworldly, right? Because I just don't know.
It could be.
It could be. I just don't know.
There is
who knows?
That problem of
Yeah.
the infinite nature of space, which seems to actually be getting bigger.
Yeah, there was a good way of putting it that my wife, who's a hell of a lot smarter than I am, tried to explain it to me, and I kept looking at it like this. But she had heard a program at one point where the person explained it like, okay, imagine how vast the ocean is, right? And how we've explored the ocean, but then you look at space and how immense it is, right, compared to the ocean, right?
Right.
The amount that we've explored in space, right, is equivalent to like a wine glass full of ocean water, right? So you take a wine glass full of ocean water, you look at it and you go, there's nothing there, right? There's all those life forms. There's all those fish in the sea. It's kind of like that. And then, you think about space and you think about what we know and what we don't know, and how we imagine, like our limited capacity to imagine what life outside of Earth could look like.
Right.
So yeah.
But when you hear talk of like crashed retrieval programs,
yeah, that keeps taking me back, and is to this whole idea of if there was a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program like David Grush talked about and had been in existence for decades, somebody would have fucking opened their yap and talked about it. I think
other than Bob Lazar,
and they would have had some better specifics, right? I mean, that's always the thing. It's always where it falls down. Well, I haven't seen it, but I talked to somebody who knows that it exists, right? And I think maybe it's because we're human, we're programmed to actually want physical evidence, right? We want to actually see it before we believe it. But, that really hasn't happened yet.
What's one of the things that's fascinating is the narrative has shifted so wildly from it's completely preposterous to credible people like David Fravor and Ryan Graves and all these different people that are talking about multiple sightings, things that completely defy our understanding of what a vehicle is capable of doing, hovering completely motionless in 120 knot winds, all the whole, whatever that thing is, the cube inside a sphere that they keep seeing over and over again.
Right.
Like,
almost hit one of the aircraft.
Yeah.
And
What the fuck is that?
Yeah. And then they land. So I think, one of the good developments out of all of this, and one of the things that may eventually lead to transparency, right? Because it will provide an avenue for these sightings, whether it's commercial or military pilots, as an example, to report it. Right, and to be more, and for the government to take, perhaps, again, it depends on whether it's a big conspiracy or not, to investigate in a more logical manner and in a more detailed manner. So I think just, again, the sheer act that we're talking about it, which then takes me back to the idea that, if you're running a secret program, you don't want people talking about it, so you're not going to muddy the waters with a false narrative if you don't have to. Right. If your concern is that someone's getting close to the truth and you got to do, okay, then maybe so. But, Do
you think it's also possible that there are patriots that do think that the American public deserves to know about this information, and they have been sitting on it for a long time? That people like David Grush and all these various people that are coming out, and more apparently are wanting to come out.
Yeah. Well, interesting thing with Grush is, look, he said so during the hearing, right? He said, I can't talk about that. I could talk about it in a skiff, right? In a sensitive, secure environment. All right. Well, if I'm, one of the people on that subcommittee, I'm going to say, you know what, to my staff, schedule, a skiff meeting with Grush. Get him in here, and let's, have him talk classified shit.
Right.
So that would be the next logical step in all of this.
Have they done that yet?
I don't know. I mean, it's,
when he said I could talk to you about it in a skiff, have people taken him up on that?
Well, you'd have to ask him. No, I wouldn't know.
Right, and they wouldn't tell anybody.
And they wouldn't tell him. And therein lies part of the problem, because if he sits there but if he sits in the skiff and continues to kind of say, well, okay, you guys aren't clear to hear this, and I can't. All right. Then you got to start questioning, what he's actually got or what he knows for sure, rather than just having this witness interviews and sort of secondhand information. But I'm much more, I guess the point is, I'm much more interested in the direct sightings than witness interviews. Right.
And the thing about him is he's not really a witness. Right. He hasn't had any personal encounters with anything. Right. He hasn't had personal encounter with a craft. He hasn't seen a retrieved craft. He hasn't seen the biological entities. These are all just programs that he's been made aware of that he felt like people needed to know about.
Yeah.
That's the narrative.
And again, not to disparage anybody, right? I mean, look, he's, if in fact, somebody leaked his medical records, which it looks like, did happen, right? Then that's pretty bullshit, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody needs to figure out what the hell is happening.
Let's see this. The information from Grush, who said he was unable to discuss specifics on what he told the Pentagon's watchdog arm. Lawmakers want to sit down with the former official in a sensitive compartmented information facility, a SCIF, to get additional information from him. The group has been blocked, however, by officials that have informed them that Grush doesn't currently have security clearance to discuss the issues in a SCIF, according to Burchett. We think that we'll get there eventually. It's just frustrating. I'm ready to go, and the American public are ready to go, he said. Luna argued that the SCIF with Grush could help lawmakers better understand the type of legislation they need to write regarding UAPs. She said she supports legislation that would declassify information on the phenomenon. So there seems to be some issue of secrecy and what's possible to discuss or what's legal to discuss.
Well, but yeah, look, the government casts a very wide net when you're talking about classified information, right? I mean, the government has overclassified information for decades and decades, right? And you've got secret, top secret, code word, and they tend to just hoover everything up and classify it, right? And then it takes fucking forever, right, to go through that process of declassification. And because nobody wants to put their neck out at that point and say, yeah, let's declassify this, right? Once it's in that pot. But the question is, great, you're saying, you can talk about it in a SCIF. Well, damn it, then that's the next. That's what the subcommittee should be doing. Right? That's their job, right? If they're curious, right, and if they're sincere about trying to get to the bottom of this, and that's theoretically their job, then they should, because again, going back to the main thing, and people can say, well, why are you wasting your time on this? But you can always circle back to the top line, which is it's for national security purposes. We want to know what the hell's going on.
Right.
And you know, if so, yeah, we'll see. I guess that's the question that should be thrown at Grush, or should be thrown at the subcommittee members.
I'm also shocked at how few people care. I feel like people are so overloaded with information today because of social media and because of the news cycle. People are so overloaded with information that this barely registered on people other than UFO nuts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a surprising amount, I thought, anyway, of sort of mainstream media coverage. It wasn't particularly deep, right? It just kind of covered, okay, it was a hearing. And I think they did it because, look, it's UFOs or UAPs, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, they knew they'd get some clicks on it if they were putting it online or whatever. And they didn't pursue it, you know, like has been any, I haven't seen any stories that talked about the follow-up with Grush. There were a couple of stories talking about the fact that perhaps his medical records were leaked, you know, as a result.
And the medical records showed what? That he had some sort of a psychiatric condition? That he had an event or something like that?
PTSD, I think some suicidal depression issues.
Standard stuff with military veterans.
Yeah. He had done his time in Afghanistan, right? And so that doesn't, it means nothing, and except for the fact that it shouldn't be out there, right? Those records should be damn well private.
Well, not only that, isn't that what we want? Why don't you shut your little dinger off there, fella?
Is that me going
That's
off?
you. Yeah, that's why your phone rang, too.
What the hell?
Got to learn how to use that little switch on the side. But
thank you for my IT lesson.
Isn't that what you want from? I mean, that's the whole purpose of providing these services for veterans. That when they do have suicidal thoughts and they are struggling with PTSD, that they get help. I mean, the idea that they're shaming him and saying that his report is not credible because of this seems ridiculous.
Bullshit. Yeah.
It's totally bullshit.
Yeah, and he said he's come out since and said, look, I did seek help. I'm in a better place. And he was happy that people were talking about it. They should be talking about it. Look, we lose a shocking number of veterans to suicide, right? And it's disgusting that we don't, that the government doesn't work harder at this, right? And spend more effort. I know a couple of people who do amazingly good work at the VA in terms of counselors, right? They're not managers, they're not executives. They work with the veterans every day, right? And it's incredible what they do. But overall, as a government, our assistance, right, to veterans. I mean, you look at the number of homeless situations. It's pathetic. And so when he talks about it, it's good that he's talking about it, right? I think that transparency helps, and he clearly views it that way too. And he said, look, I don't have any problem with discussing it, but we should be concerned by the fact that somehow his medical records were put out there. And then, some people will look at that and go, well, is that the government's effort to discredit him? Or is that somebody's effort to discredit him? I don't know why anybody else would. Why would you do that? Why would you put them out there? So, I feel for the guy in that sense. I just can't evaluate or assess the veracity of what he's saying.
Right.
So particularly the sort of the biologics thing that we're holding on to. Dead aliens. I don't know. I'm not sure about that part.
That's the old story, the old legend about Nixon, and Nixon and Jackie Gleason. Do you know that story?
No.
You don't know that story?
No. I'm glad you were able to bring Nixon into this conversation.
Yeah, Nixon apparently was drinking buddies with Jackie Gleason, and they were tying one on. And Nixon was like, "You want to see some fucking shit?" And so apparently they jumped in Air Force One. He took him to a base. And the legend goes that they showed him this retrieved UFO, and they showed him alien bodies. And the legend also goes that Jackie Gleason became a UFO nut after that. And one of the things that points to that is he actually had a home built in New York State that was in the shape of a UFO. And you could see the home. Yeah, it's like this circular flying disc-looking home that he had built in New York State. That supposedly he had it built. This is the house. Supposedly he had this thing built because it, was a representation of what he had seen.
Good God.
Yeah, pretty wild shit.
It's Westchester County, so someone will pay $12 million for it.
Yeah, I wish it was for sale.
Oh God.
I don't want to live there, but
Well, it's listed. See, that little
Nah,
corner
nah,
thing
you
said
know,
it was listed for
yeah,
$12 million.
The CIA snatched it up.
Oh, yeah. We had to get that under control. We got to shut this
Gotta
up
hide this
right
house.
now. Yeah, Norton. I used to love that show.
It's a great legend. I don't know if it's true. There's been some dispute of whether or not it's true because what the source was his ex-wife. Is that what it was? Is that what it was, Jeremy?
Yeah, and they looked up. I remember I just looked this up the other day. They looked up that source, and it was like from an interview that was in a magazine, an Esquire maybe, and that Esquire can't be found anywhere.
But that's possible with today.
The disappearing Esquire?
Talking about an Esquire from 1970, whatever.
Yeah. I had no idea. Did you ever see that? It was not that long ago. The Elvis and Nixon movie. Did you ever see that? Oh, you gotta see
Elvis
that.
and Nixon movie.
Yeah, I forget what it was called. It might have just been called Nixon and Elvis or something. But it was a great movie. It's a great watch. It's worth watching. It was a short, relatively short movie. It wasn't a documentary. It was a movie, and it was fantastic. But I can't remember the name of it.
We have that photo of Elvis. Look at that. Oh, okay.
That's it. Yeah.
It's Kevin Spacey. Ah!
Yeah, and it'll be like old times. You'll be able to go and watch Kevin Spacey back before he got,
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Who's the dude that played Elvis? It looks like Johnny Knoxville.
I don't
Who's
know
that
the
guy?
actor's name off the top of my head. Oh, hold on.
Is it Michael Shannon? Is that it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
No, it's
He's
well
not quite
yeah.
handsome enough to play Elvis.
I didn't realize like Colin Hanks was
Johnny
in that.
Knoxville
Johnny
was in the
Knoxville
movie.
was in there. Yeah.
Oh, so that's a crap movie.
Yeah.
That movie sounds like it was lacking in a casting budget.
You should watch it though. It was
on,
actually,
man.
It had its moments. It was actually very
Kevin
funny.
Spacey as
Yeah.
Nixon.
Yeah, boy, that guy disappeared off the map, didn't he? Kevin Spacey.
He was just exonerated.
Yeah.
At least some of those charges. But it seems like there was a lot of dick grabbing going on.
A lot of dick grabbing, but he was also right in the fire line. He was at that perfect moment of the storm. Right? Remember that whole
Yeah.
Me Too thing.
He does have a reputation for dick grabbing, though.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but he played a good Nixon. He was a damn fine Nixon.
Well, he played a good president too.
Yeah.
That fucking the Netflix show. What was it called?
House of
House
Cards.
of Cards.
Yeah.
Fucking great show.
That was good.
He played such a good creep. Oh my!
Although they kind of jumped the shark when he started, there was a threesome with a Secret Service officer.
Yeah.
Remember when they went to that far?
Yeah.
I thought, okay, it's time to switch and find a new series to watch. But, yeah, anyway. Hey, do you mind if I do promote something? Do you mind
Sure.
if I- all right.
Promote something. We've been doing this a while.
I have agreed to take over a podcast. believe it or not.
Take over a podcast.
And here
what
it
is
is.
this?
Here it is.
This is your podcast?
It's coming up September
Now,
5th.
this is something that someone else started and you're taking over?
Yeah. Let's see if we can make this play.
What if you had your own spy? Would you use them to keep tabs on the most important events happening around the world? Update you on exactly what you needed to know each morning so you could be smarter, more prepared, ahead of the curve. Meet CIA veteran Mike Baker. Every day he'll be your personal intelligence officer, delivering insights and analysis once reserved for the President of the United States. The President's Daily Brief with Mike Baker. Get briefed. Stay ahead. Your briefings begin on September 5th.
Damn right.
Who put this together?
First TV. So it's available on all podcast platforms, including Spotify.
Is it video as well?
No, it's just going to be an audio. Okay, we may go to video at some point, but it's 20 minutes a day.
Okay.
It starts on the 5th of September every morning at 6 a.m. About 20 minutes, and all we're going to do. The reason I love this project is because, like with the President's Daily Brief, right? It drops in the Oval Office every morning. It's very, as its name implies, it's very brief. Covers the top issues around the globe and provides a bit of context, and then that's it. And that's all the President gets, right? Just every morning to kind of get that, okay, here are the things going on that I need to pay attention
that
to.
they said that Trump wouldn't read unless his name was in it.
Yeah.
So they would inject his name into stuff
He's going
to
put
get him
this
to pay
in here.
attention.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So you always get these different, takes from the president, from every administration as to how they receive these things. But the idea is, 6 a.m. every morning, September 5th, President's Daily Brief, all podcast platforms, including Spotify. And the idea is we're just going to cover the top stories or concerns of the day, provide a little analysis and context. I'm not going to tell people how to think about it, right? There's enough, folks out there, all the pundits doing that. And then wrap it up, get on, and then it allows people. But every day, so I'm really excited about it. It starts out as it'll be an audio cast. Who knows where it'll go from there? But it took a brief hiatus, went off the air back in February, and I agreed to start hosting it. So
that's great.
It should be fun. Yeah, I mean it again, it's informative. It's not opinion driven.
Have you spoken to any presidents?
I have. Yes.
Who have you spoken to?
Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton. I will say this. I was at an event. I forget where it was. It wasn't here. It wasn't in Austin. It might have been in Little Rock. And it was a large gathering, and it was a dinner. And at the end of it, and also George Bush was there too. Had a brief chance to talk with him, but with Bill Clinton, the striking thing was, he came through the room, and I was just standing there talking to my wife and a couple others, and he came up, and he stood there and he looked at me and he started talking to me about something that we had done when I was with the agency, and he was president, an operation that we had done, and I don't think he knew I was going to be there or anything, but he stood there and started talking about this operation in real detail. I mean, no sources and methods or things, but the recall was surprising, and he was adding context about why they had made some decisions from the White House that they did about what we were doing, and he kind of stood there. He had his hands on my arm. He was just really focused on talking to the point where the Secret Service at a certain point were kind of like getting antsy and saying, "Can we move on? Can we leave?" But he kept talking, and I always thought that Clinton was he's smart. Right, and politics aside, right? He's a smart guy, but he had this ability to zero in on people, right? And the thing that he had as a politician was, not only could he make you feel like you were the only person in the room, but he had this recall, the ability to talk about things in detail that left you realizing, okay, he was a smart dude. He was he was a bit of a wanderer, right? And he had his own issues, but
that's the case with a lot of smart dudes.
Yeah.
There's a motivation for their success, and a lot of times it's women.
Yeah.
Power in women.
Right.
I mean, that has traditionally been the motivation of leaders.
Yeah. Berlusconi. Sorry. Okay, maybe not.
Well, that's a different
bunga. So that was a striking conversation that I thought. And I've actually got a photo of that. Someone snapped a photo. He was talking, and he was just kind of really focusing. And I was like, "What the hell are we talking about this for?" But I realized he was basically kind of bringing it back around to why they did something from the White House,
and he wanted to discuss it with you.
And I thought, okay, that was
This is after he's out of office.
Yes, out of office, yeah.
I would love to talk to a president about what that experience. I mean, it's my main. If I had a question for Trump. That's one of the big ones. Like, what is it like when you get in there? Like, what is it? What's the difference between perception and reality? What is the difference between your ideas of what it's like when you get into the Oval Office, what it's like when you get debriefed?
Yeah.
Because pretty much every politician has these plans. They all have these things that they say they're going to do, and then they get into office and very little of it happens.
Yeah.
Like, why is that, and what is it like?
I think they're fighting against the machine, first of all. And, maybe they show up and they imagine, that, they're going to accomplish whatever it is going to be that they're going to accomplish. But then I think the realities of Washington, D.C. set in. And I think that it's tougher now than it used to be. I mean, I think and not to romanticize the past, but I think it used to be easier to get people into a room from, both sides of the aisle and hammer out, a platform or an idea or a bill or whatever it may be. And I think that's much more difficult now for people to do because it's so damn partisan. But, it is. It's a, we had the good fortune of being in the White House a few times, and I can't imagine that it's not this overwhelming feeling when you go, if you're just elected, right, and you walk into the Oval Office, this overwhelming feeling of responsibility, and even for somebody like Trump, who probably, he probably sat down and thought, of course I'm here, and why wouldn't I be here? But and then your number one job is essentially to take a lot of shit that's happening, distill it down to its key points, and delegate, right? Because there is such a machine around you, right, that tries to plan every moment of your day, I think, and it is, it's not unlike being a CEO of a Fortune 50 company, where you've got a lot of plates spinning and you can't focus on all of them. So, which is part of the, look at me, part of the president's daily brief. The purpose of that goes into the Oval Office is to try to keep a focus on sort of the national security issues that are at the top of the hit parade in very short order, right? Because no matter how interested the president is, and look, Bush, as an example, used to go through those things with a fine-tooth comb and ask question after question after question, right? Clearly, I don't think that was Trump's style. I don't know what Biden does, right, in terms of that. But, every president's a little bit different in how they receive information and process it and then prioritize in their mind what's important. But behind you is a machine that, regardless of what you're thinking, is prioritizing concerns of the day, national security issues and military concerns and the economy and all the rest of it. So at the end of the day, we put too much we imagine the president's got more ability, right, to do things or to change things or to shape things than they actually do, right? So, not in any way to minimize the importance or the stress of that job,
Right.
but
Well, the stress of the job is unprecedented.
Yeah.
You watch the way it ages people, except him. Except Trump.
Yeah.
That motherfucker just like a duck to water.
So what do you think? Is he getting the nomination? Is he going to be the guy?
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wrong before when we talked about this a while back.
I don't think they can stop him.
Yeah.
I think the people that want Trump in office, they view the hypocrisy of this administration, the corruption, the open borders, the economy collapsing, the open checkbook to Ukraine. They view all this shit. They view all the clamping down on internal combustion engines, the green shit, what they think that is going to kill the economy and centralize money into a few very powerful hands.
Yeah.
They don't buy it at all, and they think that he's their only solution.
Does anybody from the GOP side, any of the candidates have a chance to take the nomination instead of Trump?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't see.
I don't see
who it would be.
unless something horrible happens to him. That Vivek guy is very interesting.
Yeah,
he's very interesting. He's very rational and very smart.
He does seem to talk directly about the issues.
Yes.
Right? Unlike some of the folks who are speaking more aspirational and talking about direction of the country, he does seem to focus more on these are the things we need to do specifically.
He's
right?
also clearly very, very intelligent, like superior intelligence. Like when you hear him discuss nuanced issues, he also has very good emotional intelligence because I've seen him not just challenged but disparaged on radio shows and podcasts, and he handles things very, very well. And that discussion with him was what got Don Lemon removed from CNN because Don Lemon and him went at it. I think he's, but he's very young too. Like, would people want a 37-year-old guy running the entire country, even if it's a truly exceptional mind and truly exceptional person, which I think he is.
Well, this may be the cycle, right? Meaning sort of this Biden. I mean, if Biden ends up, do you think that's the second part of the question? Do you think Biden's going to be the guy?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I think it's probably going to be fucking Mr. California.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be Gavin Newsom. I think they're probably going to try to whitewash all the failures of California and all the disastrous policies and just view him as the most presidential of the leftist progressive candidates.
And keep Kamala Harris as the VP?
No way.
No.
Not a chance in hell. I think she steps down. I think if I had to guess, something comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah. She doesn't want to do it anymore. Yeah, he has a better choice. They find her another position. She decides that she would better serve somewhere else, I just don't imagine that they wouldn't see her as a massive liability.
Yeah. Oh, I think they do. I mean, I think that that's, but as long as Biden's the candidate,
Right.
she's the VP on the ticket. Right?
Unless something horrible happens with her. Right?
Yeah.
Some sort of scandal or some sort of thing, or, Look, they removed Andrew Cuomo when just a couple months before he was the darling of the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they just decided that he was too much of a liability, and so they went after him.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how. I don't know that the party's got what it takes to come out without an incident, right? Without something, and you hate to say anything about anybody's health, but without something on a health perspective happening with Biden.
Well, the health perspective has already happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it's super clear at this point. I mean, people are giving me shit about saying it in 2020. It's super clear that he's got like real mental problems, like whatever they are, whether it's dementia, which is pure old age, whatever it is. Like he's got. I mean, when he closes his eyes, that's when everybody goes into a panic. When he's like,
No, I know, but look at what we've got. We've got him doing that, right?
Yeah.
And then he whispers. The part with his presentation that always drives me
Yeah.
crazy is when he whispers,
"Get vaccinated."
"It's Bidenomics. It's
Yeah.
working."
Yeah,
And you think,
it's
okay,
just-
stop doing that.
Well,
it's
he's
yeah.
just a goof. He's always been a goofy guy.
But you got that. You got Mitch McConnell, kind of fading out,
Falling
having
apart.
almost having a mini stroke
Yeah.
during his speech
he
that one
locked
time
up.
in front of the press, and
Well,
then
they're so old.
yeah. Have you
These
seen
people are
Feinstein
so-
is still
yeah.
there?
Yeah.
Feinstein is still there. She's handed over control. She's, like said, my daughter has control of my, business and everything and conservatorship or whatever. But I'm staying here until 2025.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
So-
and yeah, it's such a fucking strange time. It's so strange. And
So maybe somebody like Vivek says, I'm going to sit this one out. I mean, that would be to me, that would be the smart thing. If you've got aspirations and you've got the ability, but you're young, you think maybe I'll just let the whole system reboot right now because this Biden-Trump thing is just so
well,
bizarre.
Trump could choose him
Yeah.
as a VP, and I think he would be a formidable VP. If Trump runs with him as a VP, I think that's a massive asset. I really do.
Yeah.
I think because that guy, you could see him in 4 years being the president. He's so rational and intelligent. When I listen to him talk, I'm like, that's what I want from a president. I want a level-headed, super intelligent, rational person who has had a massive amount of success in the real world, who decides to enter into politics because he thinks that he can serve in a meaningful way, and he thinks that he can impart change in a meaningful way. At least that's what I'm getting
Yeah.
from him
Yeah.
in my most rose-colored glasses view of the world.
But is that what – I don't know if that's what the voters want, right? Because, again –
Well, he would balance
yeah.
out what people don't like about Trump.
Yeah.
With this bombastic personality,
Yeah.
but also like you got to give credit to the guy because that bombastic personality really did expose the deep state. It really did expose all this corruption and that's geared all the fucking Russia collusion, the fact that the media was completely on board with that there's been no apologies that this was all bullshit.
Yeah.
There's so much of that he exposed because of the fact that he fights tooth, claw, and nail. The fact that he won't back down, and then he gets it, and he literally goes after the intelligence community, which is obviously from your perspective is a terrible idea.
Well, no, it's not a terrible idea if you're going after for certain individuals politicizing. Because that can never happen. That's a death knell for any intelligence organization, as far as I'm concerned, or a federal law enforcement organization like the Bureau.
Right.
So you should always be on the lookout for that. I have no problems with that at all. But my point is always with at least with the organization that I know, it's not the body of the organization, right? You get individuals
Yes.
who are become enamored of their access or the power or the closeness to the policies, or they let their personal agenda take over. That's a real danger, and you can never let that happen. And so
That's what I think
yeah.
people need to understand when they talk disparagingly about the intelligence community. And that, in my opinion, my personal opinion, is most of these people are patriots. And that there are people that get into positions of power in every single organization, no matter what it is, where they abuse that power, and those people become corrupt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this has happened in every business. I'm sure every branch of government. I'm sure it happens everywhere, but
Yeah,
it
it
doesn't
does.
mean that the intelligence communities are unnecessary.
No, you
That-
don't. Yeah, that would be like saying, okay, you know, the CEO of a company's got a certain political agenda, and so, like with BlackRock, you know, I mean, maybe, you know, the head of it is like enamored with, you know, whatever it was, equity and
inclusion, governance.
I can't remember. Yeah, and governance, and so the whole organization is bad, right?
Right.
Well, okay, probably not everybody there thinks that way, right? But you know, all it takes is a handful at the top level on the 7th floor or wherever the organization is, and that's a problem. So you defeat that in part by having a very proactive, curious, government, right, with the proper committees and the intel, you know, committees that are up on Capitol Hill as an example, that ask all those important questions and that demand answers and that aren't so hyper partisan that they refuse to, you know, pursue the obvious, right? And you know, look, the lack of self-awareness is shocking. When you get people like Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin, you know, saying things like, "Well, this look at the Biden finances is, you know, it's bullshit. It's purely political," and Raskin and Schiff and others spent years, right, getting in front of the cameras and just spewing bullshit about the Russia collusion story. Right?
Yeah.
And yet the fact that they don't see it because they're so partisan and they don't understand, like, the important thing here is it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, you know, everybody should be subject to the same concerns and behavior and scrutiny, right? But you know, it's not going to happen. I don't know how you walk it back. I don't know how we get back to some level of normal, right? And I don't think we're going to see that during the course of this election cycle. Right? This is going to be a shit show.
Yeah.
Right? So
It's going to be a shit show, especially with the indictments.
yeah. Oh yeah. And I don't think there's any more coming down the pike. So I think these 4 are it. But you know, that D.C. indictment that's definitely a political document, right? I haven't had a chance to go through the Georgia indictment in full, but the race that they all have, right, in trying to get these things out there in the time frame that they are, you know, would seem to indicate that they've got a political motivation
Yeah.
here. Make this last through the election cycle, you know, screw over to the degree they can what they view as the top challenger, and let it go. And they don't seem to care about the public's perception of how that looks.
Right.
So-
And that's a dangerous precedent to set, because if that happens, what's to stop some authoritarian Republican from utilizing the same methods to go after people in your group?
Right.
Once the precedent's been set.
Yeah, no, there's nothing, and that's, you know, and then you get into banana, you know, republic territory. So
Yeah.
But again, I think, you know, I would be hard pressed to imagine Biden's going to end up going all the way through the whole process, you know, securing all the delegates, you know, running, winning. I mean,
I don't think they want him to. I really don't think they want
Yeah.
him to.
But
I
they've
mean,
got
another option
yeah.
is Michelle Obama that keeps getting bandied about. I'm not sure if she even wants to have anything to do with that.
you know, she's in one of those positions, right? It's like Oprah Winfrey. People say, well, Oprah Winfrey should run. Well,
The fuck she should.
yeah, I mean, well, I know, but what I mean is when they say that, you think, well, she enjoys this position of being loved by lots of people, and why would? And so Michelle Obama, she's in sort of that sweet spot, right? Everybody's, oh my God, it's Michelle Obama. You know, as soon as you put yourself in that arena,
Right. Then the hate comes at you.
yeah, shit comes at you fast,
And
so,
you don't need it.
No, I mean they've made enough money.
Yeah.
How are they
Yeah.
all doing that? How are all these people making this money?
Crazy, Mike.
It's crazy.
I don't know.
I don't get it either.
Seems weird
Yeah.
on a $400,000 a year salary.
Yeah,
All of a
or-
sudden you're worth hundreds of millions.
Or you look at the senators, right?
Yeah.
How's that working? And
How is
so
that crazy
'cause-
with the fucking just the insider trading? How is that still legal?
well, and what is it? A senator's salary is in like I think the low 200,000s or something like that. Maybe I forget. But yeah, my experience has been you don't become a multimillionaire, you know, doing that unless you're really savvy.
Shenanigans.
Picking stocks, right?
Yeah, little
and I'm sitting in a
shenanigans.
committee and I hear somebody talk about a new program that's going to be developed to develop a new type of propulsion system.
Right.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
that's how it goes.
That's right.
That's how it
That's how
goes.
it goes. Yeah. Hey, I want you to have this, man. This is
Oh.
the easiest, simplest lighter you'll ever find. It's
All
a
right.
Zippo.
Thank you.
And
It's a CIA lighter.
It's a CIA
Good.
lighter.
I could bring this around my paranoid friends that already think that I'm a CIA operative.
And there's not a transmitter in that. I don't
I'm
want you to
give
think
that
that
to Eddie
there's...
Bravo.
Okay.
He'll fucking bury it in the ground.
Yeah, there's no transmitter in that lighter,
Mike,
man.
thank you very much. Appreciate you. Let's do it again in a few months, and hopefully the world's not glowing.
I hope so,
and,
man.
Tell us more about your podcast, and I'm sure it's going great.
Oh, yeah. President's Daily Brief, September 5th, starts on all podcast platforms, including Spotify.
Beautiful.
Listen for it.
Good luck with that.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Bye, everybody.